The lie at the center of One Piece. Everything you know about One Piece is a lie, which is quite problematic because the premise of the series is that we are discovering the truth of the world alongside this rubber idiot and his friends. And yet from Chapter 1, we have all collectively agreed to role-play inside world government propaganda, like it's a cozy little blanket. This is not just the characters being lied to. This is the audience being trained to accept those lies as the default reality. And, to be fair, we have been very obedient little Marines about it. We all nod along when they say, the great age of piracy began with Roger's execution. Right, romantic last words spark an era of freedom and chaos. Very epic, very shonen. But what if that whole pirate-era story is a pressure valve, a controlled burn engineered by the same people who literally vaporized Ohara for reading history books? Because as far as the 5 very old men with suspiciously durable bodies are concerned, it's better to let the world chase a vague treasure than ask who built the world in the first place. Here's an interesting thing. The only confirmed crime that gets you Buster called off the map is researching the Void Century, not mass slavery, not celestial dragons hunting people for sport, not building a giant murder ship, no, just trying to read some rocks. And we as readers went, ah yes, that's the lost history segment, and moved on. Like it's a side quest. The world government didn't just delete 100 years. They replaced it with a fake narrative about pirates' dreams and inherited will, and we bought it because it was fun. Fans will confidently tell you the Void Century is just forgotten history. The One Piece is a treasure, and the Will of D is a mysterious middle initial that means smiley chaos gremlin. To which I say, mate, that's not analysis. That's repeating the in-universe marketing brochure. None of that is actually confirmed. On page, what we have are scattered poneglyphs, a giant straw hat in a freezer, a sun god who may be a job title, and a shadow monarch, sitting on an empty throne pretending not to exist. I want to emphasize this video is not just, what if One Piece is a bomb? LOL. We're going to treat One Piece like a conspiracy text like Oda accidentally wrote the Da Vinci Code, but with more rubber and war crimes. We're going to reread the entire series as a coordinated misdirection, a power system of lies, where Roger's execution, the Yonko balance, the Shichibukai, and even Luffy's goofy fruit are part of a containment strategy, not a random mess of cool ideas. We'll be cross-examining Ohara, Laugh-Tale, Devil Fruits, the D, Clan, and Imu as pieces of one single much darker puzzle. Why is researching history a bigger crime than ancient weapons? Why is a song and a poneglyph more terrifying to the world government than Pluton? Why do devil fruits feel like man-made wish receipts from a dead civilization? And what if the One Piece isn't treasure at all, but a mechanism that will literally change the shape of the world? By the time we're done, your favorite cheerful pirate manga might look a lot more like a cover-up. What this video is actually arguing. So we need to draw a very important line in the sand here before we start accusing a cartoon skeleton of participating in a 1,000-year cover-up. This is not a One Piece is bad actually video. This is a One Piece is about a world where being wrong on purpose is the main export video. People love to say, Oda fumbled this lore, or the power system is a mess. To which I say, yes, but also no, but also that's kind of the point. Because as far as the characters are concerned, they live in a reality that has been aggressively patched, censored, and hot-fixed for 800 years. The story is built on controlled information and very deliberate gaps. Our job here is to poke those gaps until they start screaming. So, what are we actually arguing? We're going to track 4 big pillars where the lies are doing the heaviest lifting. First, the Void Century and the Great Kingdom. What Ohara died for, why poneglyphs exist, and how the world government didn't just delete history, it uploaded a fake one from Chapter 1. Second, the D lineage. Why every major war, from God Valley to Marineford, quietly orbits people with one extremely suspicious middle initial. Third, devil fruits and ancient tech. The idea that these aren't random magic gotcha pulls, but man-made or wish-based artifacts tied to a lost civilization and things like the Mother Flame. And finally, the true nature of the One Piece and Laugh tale. Why a joke, a song, and a smile scare Emu more than Pluton ever did. Here's an interesting thing. To make this work, Oda has to be absurdly competent. We're talking one of the 10 best-selling authors in human history, literally sharing a list with Shakespeare levels of competent. Multi-decade serialization, record-breaking volumes, and a reputation for setups that pay off 15 years later. I want to emphasize that we are not arguing he just tripped and fell into a conspiracy manga. We're arguing he built a world where conspiracy is the water everyone swims in. And to be fair, that world is a vague mess on purpose. The history is contradictory. The bloodlines are mysterious. The power system keeps sprouting new branches. The treasure is a punchline we still haven't seen. These systems are flawed and functional at the same time. They work just well enough to tell a coherent story, but the fuzziness is exactly what lets Oda hide the biggest twists in plain sight without technically lying to you. So how are we going to do this without turning into that guy who pauses every panel to explain the secret moon language? With receipts. We're going lore-heavy and citation-driven. Chapter numbers, SBS comments, wording quirks like how inherited will keeps popping up, and rereads of famous scenes you probably thought were settled. Why is researching the Void Century treated as a worse crime than ancient weapons? Why do D-carriers smile at death like they know the punchline? Why does Imu sit on the empty throne that is, by definition, not supposed to have a butt in it? By the end, if we do this right, you won't just have new headcanons, you'll have a different way of reading One Piece as a whole. So let's start where the lies officially begin. The Void Century and the Great Kingdom. The simple story you were told about the world. So here's the official story we've all kind of absorbed by osmosis. The world of One Piece is actually pretty simple. You've got the world government on top, the Marines as their big shiny badge of justice, and pirates as the chaotic gremlins breaking toys in the daycare. On paper, it's very clean. The world government is the default authority, the thing that exists because someone has to keep order, right? The Marines wear uniforms, salute flags, yell about justice, and occasionally punch a sea monster so hard it repents. Pirates, on the other hand, are framed as walking natural disasters. They pillage, they burn, they laugh weirdly, and every once in a while one of them gets a cool nickname and a bounty poster you want on your wall. Ancient weapons? Easy. They're the nukes. Pluton is a ship that erases islands. Poseidon is a mermaid who controls sea monsters. Uranus is the mysterious one we file under. Don't worry about it. It's just the biggest gun. One Piece itself is the ultimate pirate treasure, a giant pile of wealth and status at the end of the Grand Line. You become Pirate King. You win the game. Simple power system, simple reward. Now, history. The Void Century, as far as most fans operate, is just the censored prequel. 100 years of erased lore, a mysterious great kingdom that lost to the early world government, and then credits. The winners erase the losers. The poneglyphs are basically indestructible USB sticks scattered around the world, so Robin has something to read. They're plot coupons. Collect enough blue rocks. Redeem for endgame lore. The D is even more streamlined. It's a quirky middle initial that only shows up on important people. Luffy, Roger, Teach, Law, Garp. We're told it's the will of D, which we take to mean they're destined troublemakers, natural-born enemies of the celestial dragons who either topple regimes or die trying. They smile at death because they're just built different. Cool, mysterious, move on. Devil fruits? Also easy. Random magical fruits that give arbitrary powers because Oda thought, what if this guy was a giraffe, actually? You eat one, you get a power. You sink in the sea. Some are Logias, some are Zoans, some are Paramecias, and to be fair, the categories are already kind of a mess. Then we have artificial smiles, which are just discount devil fruits with a side of permanent laughter. The sea's curse is a vague trade-off, so the system doesn't look completely broken. And here's an interesting thing. None of this is wrong. It's just the children's book version. This is the school textbook written by the winners, and also the meta-textbook the manga feeds us one safe piece at a time. I want to emphasize that what looks like simple exposition is, in-universe, literal propaganda, and, out-of-universe, a narrative smokescreen. People say, well, that's just world-building, to which I say, sure, if your idea of world-building is giving everyone a fun little lie, because as far as the world government is concerned, you are supposed to stop here. Marines equal justice, pirates equal chaos, ancient weapons equal nukes, One Piece equals gold, full stop. But if that were true, why is researching history treated as worse than mass murder? Why are the D carriers orbiting every major war? Why does the sea hate devil fruit so specifically? Our next step is to take each of those simple explanations and show you where the seams are already splitting. Why One Piece is designed to lie to you. So here's the uncomfortable part. The seams are splitting because this world is built out of lies on purpose. Not just in-universe propaganda, but the way Oda structures what you and I are even allowed to know. One Piece isn't a story that contains misinformation. It's a story that runs on it as fuel. I want to emphasize how rarely we get clean, objective lore. Almost every big fact arrives through a biased narrator with an agenda. Marines tell you pirates are monsters. Pirates tell you the Marines are monsters. The world government scholars in Ohara? Brilliant, but still working off fragments and guesswork. Even legends about Joyboy and the Great Kingdom come through half-drunk old men, bar tales, and Robin piecing together stone tweets from 800 years ago. And to be fair, if your only history textbook was carved in a language no one can read, you'd probably improvise too. Because as far as information control goes, Oda treats the entire cast like unreliable YouTubers. Whitebeard dying on a live stream, Sengoku giving a press conference, Morgans spinning everything into clickbait headlines, the Gorosei quietly editing the script in the background. We almost never see the camera cut to a neutral narrator and just tell us, here is what the Void Century was. Instead, we're stuck in an echo chamber of half-truths. And then there's the heard it in a bar delivery system, bounties, rumors. I heard that guy destroyed a whole island with one punch. You get Shank's first bounty poster, and it's not a dossier. It's literally a wanted meme. The series trains us to accept vague, fuzzy facts as normal. How strong is Mihawk really? What exactly is Uranus? Is Imu a person, a title, or a weird shadow filter? The answer is always, don't worry about it. Some guy in a tavern said a thing once. Here's an interesting thing. That mess is intentional conditioning. By the time we hit Ohara and learn that researching history is treated as worse than mass murder, we're already used to the idea that truth is something you overhear, not something you verify. So when the world government rewrites the Great Kingdom as ancient superweapon bad guys, we just nod along because that's how information has always sounded in this series. And Oda doesn't just lie with exposition. He weaponizes comedy. World-shaking details get buried under gags, funny faces, and throwaway lines we all laughed at and scrolled past. Laboon is a crying whale joke until he becomes a living receipt for a pirate crew that knew about the Grand Line structure decades earlier. Buggy is a clown failure who accidentally shows us how dangerous fragmented knowledge of Roger's journey really is. Foxy is literal filler energy, to which I say yes, and also a sandbox for the ethics of rigging games with broken powers. That's what we're calling narrative camouflage. Serious lore wrapped so tightly in jokes that our brains file it under filler instead of thesis statement. A talking skeleton makes a skull joke while casually confirming that souls can leave bodies and come back. A goofy song about the Binks sock trade route quietly maps an older world order. You think you're watching a bit. You're actually being handed the user manual, and the wild part is that some of the clearest statements about the Void Century, the D, and even the function of the One Piece itself are sitting right there in those joke moments. Later on, we're going to go back to specific gags you've probably memed to death and treat them like legal documents. Because if the serious scenes are all lies and censorship, the punchlines might be the only honest witnesses left. The official history versus the real history. So when we joke about treating gags like legal documents, it only works because the actual official documents in this world are cooked. Like, from Chapter 1, we're handed a neat little brochure. 4 blues, Grand Line in the middle, Red Line as the big wall, Calm Belts as the Do Not Touch tape. It looks clean. It looks organized. It looks like a mobile game tutorial screen. And then the story quietly starts telling us, yeah, this planet is a crime scene. Reverse Mountain is already insane. Knock-up streams, sky islands, Florian Triangle, entire chunks of land just missing. Later, Vegapunk basically goes, by the way, sea levels rose dramatically, which implies something got blown up so hard the whole world's geography had to respawn. So that sanitized map we all internalized as kids? That might be the after photo. Here's an interesting thing. The world government keeps bragging about 800 years of peace, to which I say, mate, if you need to nuke librarians to maintain your peace, your PR needs work. Because as far as their story goes, the Void Century is just nothing. A vague gap, don't worry about it. Ancient weapons? Bad. Great Kingdom? Never heard of her. The entire pirate era is framed as chaos that they nobly contain. But the more we learn, the more that peace looks like a lid on a pressure cooker. The Great Kingdom isn't just erased, it's inverted. The winners turned themselves into gods on top of the Red Line and made the losers into a crime. Not a defeated nation, a thought crime. Simply researching that period is legally worse than mass murder. Ohara is the clearest, nastiest proof. The official excuse is they might awaken a terrible weapon. And to be fair, that sounds scary until you realize the Buster Call doesn't target a cannon, it targets a library. The ships don't roll up like, "Where's the doomsday device?" They just start burning books and historians. The story literally lingers on the books being saved as more important than the people. Oda is screaming at us. Erasing knowledge is the real world-ending weapon. I want to emphasize how on the nose the text gets. Clover straight up says the government fears the true history. Robin calls the official version fabricated. Vegapunk, the smartest man alive, confirms that the world's shape itself is part of a lie. But we never get the full replacement narrative, just fragments. A too advanced civilization, a broken promise, a sea level that doesn't match the ruins we keep tripping over. So, if the map is fake, the piece is fake, and the history books are fake, what else is just set dressing for a cover-up? Are devil fruits actually leftover tech or wish receipts from that lost era? Is the sea supposed to be this deadly, or is it literally the byproduct of a planet-wide flood event? How many islands we love are just the tips of drowned continents? In the next part, we're going to poke at that idea hard enough that the entire world might start to tilt. Void Century 101, the version you think you know. So let's actually do the responsible thing and step back to Void Century 101 before we start accusing the ocean of being a crime scene. Because as far as canon goes, the series is surprisingly clear on the basics, and then immediately slams the door in our face. On paper, the Void Century is simple. There is a clean, official 100-year gap in the world's recorded history that the world government treats like Voldemort's diary. You're not allowed to read it. You're not allowed to talk about it. And if you so much as major in archaeology with a minor in questioning authority, you get an Ohara speed run. The only surviving records are the poneglyphs, indestructible stone tablets, written in an ancient script, deliberately scattered so they could outlive censorship. That's not us tinfoil hatting, that's literally stated. Here's an interesting thing. Even with that tiny data set, we still get the outline of a story. Professor Clover on Ohara pieces together that during that blank century there existed a massive, prosperous, great kingdom. Not some random island nation, but a political power so threatening that 20 other nations banded together, went to war with it, and then founded the world government on its corpse. Clover also notes that the kingdom's true name is Tebu. The elders freak out the moment he's about to say it. To which I say, if your government starts sniping historians mid-lecture, you're probably the bad guys. From that, fandom does what fandom does best. We fill in the gaps with the cleanest possible myth. The Great Kingdom becomes the ancient good guys, a kind of global Skypiea where everyone laughed like Luffy, held hands, and did socialism with robots. The 20 kingdoms are the usurpers, the celestial dragons are their inbred grandkids, and the ancient weapons are framed as the Great Kingdom's trump cards, stolen or sealed away. Joyboy slots in as the tragic hero who failed to save Fishman Island, failed to keep his promise, and died before he could play the grand finale at Laugh Tale. And to be fair, the text really invites that read. Clover calls the kingdom highly advanced and prosperous. Roger laughs at the end of the world. The poneglyphs are basically underground zines resisting censorship, and the One Piece itself is often treated as this symbolic restoration of a lost golden age. You open the chest, cue the dawn, roll credits. I want to emphasize that story is satisfying. It's clean. It's also probably wrong, or at least way too neat, because as far as we can tell, both sides of that ancient war were playing with forces that feel uncomfortably familiar: world-shaping tech, reality-bending fruits, weapons named after gods. You don't build continent-busting battleships and planet-sized energy systems if everything is chill. So what if the Void Century isn't Golden Age versus Evil Empire, but two competing superpowers, both yanking on the fabric of reality until it tears? What if devil fruits, the ancient weapons, and even the shape of the seas are the bill coming due? In the next section, we're going to start tugging on that thread and ask, what kind of civilization makes a world this broken on purpose? Poneglyphs, the world's unhackable hard drives. So if the world itself has been deliberately broken, we need to ask, who left the patch notes? Because as far as One Piece goes, the answer is not some historian. It's massive indestructible stone USB sticks that the government treats like nukes. Poneglyphs get treated in the fandom like glorified quest markers. Go here, read rock, advance plot, to which I say, mate, if it was just exposition furniture, the world government wouldn't literally execute librarians over it. These things are unhackable hard drives. They're built to be unreadable, unmovable, and undeletable, specifically to outlive a regime that controls every other information channel on the planet. Here's an interesting thing. The story tells us exactly who built this anti-censorship system: the Kozuki clan. The same family that carved the poneglyphs also invented the script used on them, in alliance with the mysterious Great Kingdom. That means Wano isn't just cool samurai country. It's basically the offline backup server for the Void Century. Their isolation? That's not quirky world building, that's air-gapped security. You don't plug your root password into the open internet, and you don't leave your anti-world government Rosetta Stone in a country that lets the Marines dock. I want to emphasize how overbuilt this is. We've got 3 flavors of poneglyphs: the blue historical stones that record events, apologies, and weapon specs; the red road poneglyphs that only give you coordinates, like GPS satellites made of granite; and then the Rio poneglyph, the hypothetical full master record that you get by combining all the others. That's not random lore. That's a distributed, encrypted database. No single point of failure, no single island you can buster call and call it a day. And to be fair, the world government tries. Ohara shows us their entire attitude in one massacre. They don't just ban reading poneglyphs, they treat the ability to decode them as a war crime. Nico Robin, at 8 years old, gets a bounty bigger than most grown pirates just for being able to sound out the Void Century. That's the level of panic we're dealing with. When a regime fears a child with a dictionary more than a Yonko with a fleet, what does that say about the power of the data sitting on those stones? This is where the modern parallel kicks in. When a government fears information more than armies, it's admitting that the truth alone can topple the entire system. So, what if One Piece itself isn't gold, or weapons, or even some magic button? What if the treasure is the completed Rio poneglyph, the punchline to the world's longest redacted joke? If that's the case, then Laugh Tale isn't a vault, it's a reveal. And if the real prize is knowledge, then the people carrying the D might not be destined conquerors at all, but walking hard drives wired to detonate the lie. Which raises a different question. Who built that bloodline-based operating system in the first place? Ohara, the day history was murdered. If the D are walking hard drives, then Ohara is what happens when the antivirus decides the hard drive itself is illegal, not what's on it. the act of knowing. So, quick recap of the worst library day in history. The scholars of Ohara start actually doing their jobs, quietly decoding poneglyphs and piecing together the void century. Professor Clover gets so close he literally walks up to a Den Mushi courtroom and is like, "Hey, I'm about to say the name of the great kingdom," and the world government responds with the narrative equivalent of yanking the aux cord. Mid-sentence, buster call, island deleted, history turned into smoke. And to be fair, One Piece has a lot of war crimes, but this one is special because as far as the law is concerned, the crime wasn't rebellion or weapons or mass murder. It was reading. Researching the past is treated as worse than piracy, worse than someone like Doflamingo turning a country into a puppet show. That tells you the regime's power system is not protect people, it's protect the story. If you ever wondered what the world government is actually scared of, it's not Luffy punching a celestial dragon, it's Robin learning to pronounce syllables in the wrong order. Here's an interesting thing. Decades later, Vegapunk pulls back the curtain and quietly says, "Yeah, that total annihilation you heard about, not quite." The giants of Elbaf salvaged the books from the lake. The scholar's work survived, hidden in plain sight, and Vegapunk himself went there to study. Officially, Ohara is a cautionary tale about what happens when you break the rules. Unofficially, it's a backup drive. The government's narrative is, we erased them, but the reality is that their own overkill scattered the data instead of deleting it. And then we get Jaguar D. Saul, which is Oda having the story lie to us, the same way the government lies to the world. We watch Saul get frozen by Aokiji. We see the ship burn. We grieve. Years later, Vegapunk just drops, "Oh yeah, the giant covered in bandages on Elbaf, that's Saul." People say that's a cheap fake out, to which I say, yes, and that's kind of the point. The text itself participates in the cover-up, then retroactively reveals the conspiracy. The narrative is training you to doubt official deaths the same way you're supposed to doubt official history. I want to emphasize how clean this retcon actually is. It deepens Aokiji's moral mess, it ties Elbaf to the Void Century research, and it makes Ohara less of a tragedy and more of a seed. The world government thought they buried a threat. They accidentally fertilized it. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. If Ohara died to stop the truth about the Great Kingdom, that implies the Great Kingdom did something to the planet, big enough to terrify the winners centuries later. What if Joyboy's side wasn't pure heroism, but a catastrophic good idea at the time that rewrote seas, islands, maybe gravity itself? What if the Void Century isn't a simple good versus evil story at all, but a fight between two terrible options? And Luffy is about to reboot that choice? Because if that's true, then the next secret we dig up makes Ohara look small. The Great Kingdom, not just the good guys? So let's talk about the elephant in the Void Century. What if the Great Kingdom wasn't some wholesome ancient tumbler mutual of freedom and friendship, but the first global superpower that broke the planet? Clover calls it vast and prosperous, right? Fans hear that and go, "Ah yes, Atlantis, but nice." To which I say, when in human history has vast and prosperous ever meant chill, that language screams advanced tech, global reach, trade networks, maybe even a kind of soft hegemony where their ideas, their power system, their reality are the default. We're basically looking at Joyboy's empire, not Joyboy's book club. Here's an interesting thing. The ancient weapons are explicitly tied to that same era. Pluton, a warship that can erase islands. Poseidon, a living interface to sea kings. Uranus, a giant question mark that Imu uses to literally delete a kingdom off the map. These aren't just big cannons. They're world-editing tools. Combine that with the Red Line, the Grand Line, the insane sea levels, and suddenly the Great Kingdom starts looking like the only group that could have run a global terraforming project and survived long enough to write poneglyph patch notes about it. And to be fair, we already know this world loves dangerous science. Vegapunk is out here making seraphim, laser beams, and mother flame. And that's with the world government supposedly suppressing tech. Imagine what the people who built the poneglyph system were cooking up when nobody could tell them no. Devil fruits might actually be artificial, wish-based phenomena from that civilization, a catalog of what-if powers that leaked into nature. Gravity shenanigans like Skypia's islands, knock-up streams, even the calm belt could be the side effects of someone trying to rewrite how oceans and weight work. So now flip the script on the 20 nations. The official story is they nobly united to defeat an evil kingdom. We usually read that as propaganda because as far as our sympathy goes, the celestial dragons are cartoonishly awful. But what if, at the time, you had one monopoly holding all the reality-warping tech, ancient weapons, devil fruit research, mother flame-style energy, and casually running experiments that sunk islands and displaced entire peoples? Calling that rebellion a liberation suddenly doesn't sound that crazy, even if their descendants turned the win into a slave-owning cosplay convention. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if Luffy's not here to restore the old status quo, but to finish the job? What if the One Piece is literally the last piece of a world-scale process the Great Kingdom started and never completed? Not treasure, not a flag, but the final key that can change sea levels again, tear down the Red Line, maybe even flip gravity. The world government might be terrified not because it's evil history, but because turning that machine back on means rolling the dice on a second planetary patch. And I want to emphasize, that makes Joyboy less Lost Messiah, more early access dev who shipped a broken update. The question is, will Luffy install patch 2.0? Joyboy, the promise that broke the planet. So when we say patch 2.0, we're not just talking about better Wi-Fi for Fishman Island. We might be talking about the guy who literally bricked the planet with an unfinished update and then logged off. That's Joyboy. On the surface level, Joyboy is actually pretty simple. We know him from exactly 3 big things: the Apology poneglyph in Fishman Island, the giant ship Noah, and the fact that his name is stapled to Laugh Tale and the One Piece itself. The poneglyph is basically a cosmic "my bad" to Poseidon, the mermaid princess with Sea King Command DLC, saying he couldn't fulfill a promise. Noah is the absurdly huge ark parked in the middle of Fishman Island, explicitly tied to that promise. And then, at the end of the Grand Line, we've got Roger laughing at a story that's apparently Joyboy's grand joke and grand failure at the same time. The common reading goes like this: Joyboy was a tragic good guy. He promised to bring fishmen and merfolk to live safely on the surface, probably using Noah and Poseidon's power over the Sea Kings, but the Void Century War and the rise of the world government nuked his plans. To which I say, that's a perfectly fine shonen backstory for a side quest. But does it really justify an entire world order committing to a 1,000-year censorship speedrun? Here's an interesting thing. The text never actually says the promise was only about moving Fishman Island. That's just the part Shirahoshi's story cares about. What if that relocation was one mission in a much larger, multi-step operation? We've already floated the idea of a planetary mechanism. Joyboy's promise may have been to complete the reboot, adjust the seas, fix the broken geography, then bring everyone, including fishmen, to a world that isn't a bugged map. Now plug Noah, Sea Kings, and Prophecy into that. Noah isn't just a boat, it's a piece of infrastructure. The Sea Kings explicitly say they're waiting for a future king to guide them. Why do you need an army of kaiju tugboats unless you're hauling something on a planetary scale, moving entire land masses, stabilizing that broken machine under the red line? You're not steering that with a regular helm. You need a living control system, which is what Poseidon is. And to be fair, that suddenly makes the world government's paranoia feel way less dramatic and way more, please don't press the big red button again. Because as far as recurring roles go, Joyboy starts to look less like one specific guy and more like a job title. Tie him to the D, lineage, those natural enemies of the gods who keep showing up at every world-shaking event, and then fuse that with the Nika fruit, a power whose whole thing is liberating people and changing the environment through imagination. You don't just get a hero, you get a cyclical patch manager for reality. I want to emphasize that implies the world is built for repeats. Joyboy fails, the system hard crashes, the government slaps on a hotfix, and then the next D-bearing Nika user spawns in to try again. So the real question isn't who was Joyboy, it's how many Joyboys have we already burned through? And what did the last one do to make Imu this scared? And if this is a loop, that drags us straight into the D-clan's real job description, the D, a middle initial that started wars. So when we say Joyboy has a job, the HR department of the universe basically stamps one thing on the contract, that cursed little middle initial. Because as far as the story is concerned, the D is not subtle. We meet Luffy D. Monkey, yes, we're doing it backwards, because the series is a mess like that, who accidentally launches the Great Pirate Era 2.0 by ringing the Ox Bell, punching celestial dragons, and declaring war on the world government in the most casual way possible. His spiritual big brother Ace, Portgas D. Ace, dies on the most televised battlefield in history, and his death literally reshapes global power balances. Then you've got Garp, the hero of the Marines, who is a D, working at the absolute center of government military power while secretly babysitting the next pirate king and the son of the most wanted revolutionary. Roger D. Gold kicks off the original Great Pirate Era with one execution speech. Teach D. Marshall steals Whitebeard's fruit, breaks Impel down, and basically speedruns worst pirate in history. Law D. Trafalgar topples Doflamingo and triggers the current Yonko War. And Jaguar D. Saul? His crime is saving one traumatized archaeologist and accidentally preserving the last real historian in the world. Here's an interesting thing. Every one of those guys is standing at some historical fault line. Era begins, era ends, or the status quo takes a direct punch to the teeth. You can draw a timeline of world-shaking events and just keep circling the Ds like you're grading a very cursed multiple-choice test. So fandom does the natural thing and goes, oh, it's the will of D. They're just the inherited will of freedom, natural enemies of the gods, vibes. To which I say, sure, but that's like describing nuclear weapons as kind of spicy rocks. The freedom angle is real, the rebellion angle is real, but it's all very vague on purpose. It's a narrative sticky note that says, important, do not open until Void Century Arc. And to be fair, the people most scared of that sticky note are the ones running the world. The world government censors the initial so hard that even high-ranking Marines like Sengoku have to whisper about it. The Gorosei panic when a D shows up in a wanted poster. The Ohara scholars get erased not for building weapons, but for reading the wrong middle initial in stone. Notice the pattern. Rock's Era, God Valley, with Rocks and Whitebeard, and Big Mom all circling a certain mysterious D-bearing crew. Roger's Era, obviously, the Great Pirate Era, triggered by a D-execution. The current upheaval, Reverie Chaos, Warlord System abolished, Yonko Shuffle is being piloted by a D, wearing a straw hat, and another one with a very edgy hat. I want to emphasize, this doesn't feel like one family tree. It feels like a role, a title, maybe even a contract. The D might be less secret surname and more, you signed up for an ancient agreement with the Great Kingdom, or with whatever the Great Kingdom itself was answering to. And if that's true, then the real question isn't who are the D, it's what did they promise to do the last time the world was destroyed, and what happens when this generation finally cashes that promise in. What does the D actually stand for? So, if the D is a contract, we kind of have to ask the most cursed HR question of all time. What's actually written on that paperwork? Because, as far as the story tells us, even the people carrying the D don't fully know what they signed up for. Here's an interesting thing. The one phrase Oda keeps circling is natural enemy of the gods. In English, it sounds poetic and vague. In Japanese, it's more like Tenchi no Teki / Kami no Teki territory, this really blunt enemy of the heavens / gods label, not mischievous rival, enemy. The official translations sand it down a bit, to which I say, mate, if someone called me the natural enemy of gods, I'd at least like that on a t-shirt. And to be fair, look at who actually says it. It's not some drunk in a bar. It's people like Corazon quietly telling Law that people with D in their name are the natural enemies of the gods, like he's passing on a curse he doesn't understand. Sengoku talks about the D as something that always brings a storm. The Gorosei whisper about it like a contamination. Nobody defines it. Everyone talks around it. That's prophecy behavior. That's old classification we inherited and never updated the file behavior. I want to emphasize how taboo it is. Corazon risks treason just to warn Law. Sengoku hides Roger's kid because the bloodline of the D is too dangerous to exist on paper. The Gorosei freak out over Luffy's poster name change. This isn't normal, oh no, strong pirate panic. It feels like they're watching a timer they can't stop, which is where the fan theories pile up. Dawn, Devil, Danger, Deluge. Dawn is the fan favorite because of all the sunrise talk, the will of D ushering in a new dawn, the literal Dawn Island. Devil fits the enemy of the gods angle and the devil fruits, but it's almost too on the nose, like calling your secret weapon Gun Makshuti. Danger lines up with Sengoku's storm comments and the way D carriers literally reshape history around them. Deluge ties into world flooding, sea levels, and all the world will be overturned wording. If we're grading them against canon, Dawn plus Danger plus Deluge is actually not a bad combo. People of the D, show up, a storm hits, the world order drowns, and a new dawn rises out of the wreckage. Devil feels more like the propaganda name the celestial dragons would use. And this is where it gets messier, because the D is not a simple good versus evil marker. Garp is a Marine hero. Saul is a Marine who saves Robin. Rock's D. Zebek is probably not on Santa's nice list. Luffy is chaos in a straw hat. The system doesn't care about faction, it cares about collision. D shows up on every side that's structurally positioned to smash into the world government's biggest lies. So maybe the D doesn't stand for a word at all. Maybe it's a tag for people locked into a cycle of world reshaping, the ones whose lives are gravitationally pulled toward whatever really happened in the void century. And if that's true, then the scary part isn't what the D means. It's what has to break next time the storm hits, and who the story has quietly marked as the next lightning rod. Rocks, Roger, Luffy, Teach, the D as a recurring role. And once you start looking for those lightning rods, the story basically starts screaming names at you. Because as far as the D goes, we don't just have a bloodline. We have a recurring role that keeps getting recast every few decades, and the world keeps fumbling the climax. First up is the guy the series treated like a creepy pasta until God Valley rocks D. Zebek. His stated goal is absurdly direct. Overthrow the celestial dragons, become king of the world, flip the entire system. No pirate king aesthetics, no romance of adventure, just raw, hostile takeover. And what happens? God Valley, an island that vanishes off the map, a battle that's only remembered as Garp's Big W, and a whole era scrubbed so hard that even other emperors talk about rocks like an urban legend. I want to emphasize how extreme that is. This isn't downplayed, it's Control-Alt-Deleted from history. Then the role gets recast as Goldie Roger, and he does the exact opposite vibe. He makes it all the way to Laugh Tale, reads the poneglyph receipts, learns the Void Century truth, sees the One Piece, and laughs. Instead of marching back and tearing down Maria Joie, he chooses to turn himself into a narrative device. Public execution, last-minute flex about his treasure, and suddenly the whole planet is in a great pirate-era side quest. People complain that Roger should have toppled the system, to which I say, that's kind of the point. He passes the mission on instead of finishing it. Here's an interesting thing. By the time we hit Luffy and Blackbeard, the role actually forks. Monkey D. Luffy is the D as liberation and joy. He frees islands, breaks gears off ancient weapons plots, and accidentally assembles a walking anti-world government coalition that still thinks it's just chasing meat. Marshal D. Teach is the D as weaponized opportunism. He loots Whitebeard's power, farms prisons for crew, and treats the pirate era like a coupon book. Same letter, same era, radically different answers to the question, what do you do when the world is a rigged system? And then we have the weird one, Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, the surgeon of death, survivor of Flavance, a country literally erased over a medical cover-up, national genocide, corporate poison, world government collusion, the whole thing quietly buried. Law's D isn't just about storms and destiny. It's tied into experimentation, the Ope Ope no Mi immortality deal, and the idea that even medicine in this world is a political weapon. He operates, literally, on the fallout of the Void Century without ever having to say the words. When you line these people up, it stops feeling random. Rocks at God Valley, Roger at Laugh Tale, Luffy and Teach in the new era, Law at the heart of a national erasure. All of them show up right when the world could have fundamentally changed, but doesn't. The promise keeps getting delayed. Someone laughs, instead of pulling the trigger, someone dies, someone gets erased, Someone chooses chaos over repair. And to be fair, that delay is suspiciously convenient for one specific group. Because if the DS are the recurring leads, then somewhere out there is the director making sure the play never actually ends. The day the world government blinked, ICE's execution. And if there's a director, Marineford is the night they tried to end the play mid-scene. Not a rewrite, a live televised cancellation of the D brand itself. Because as far as the official story goes, Ace is not a person at Marineford. He's a prop. He's the Pirate King's son strapped to a cross in 4K, center stage, with every snot-nosed kid in the world watching. This isn't Punish a Criminal. This is Watch Us Kill the sequel to Roger so you all stop believing there was ever a pilot episode. Here's an interesting thing. Sengoku's big speech is usually read as lore dump. Cool little info drop, right? Ace is Roger's son, raised by Garp, blood of the devil, etc. To which I say, that is not exposition, that is propaganda theater. He literally pauses the execution to do a TED Talk about genealogy. Why? Because the world government wants you to see them dominate the bloodline itself. Not just a pirate crew, the blood, the idea. They parade out the son of the Pirate King label because it turns the scaffold into a symbolic guillotine for the entire D lineage. It's them saying, look, the will of Roger, the Age of Pirates, this vague inherited will mess, we can cut it off whenever we want. And to be fair, if the war had ended right there with a clean execution, that message probably lands. But the system immediately collapses under the weight of its own spectacle. Whitebeard shows up and, instead of playing his assigned role as the tragic relic, he commits the single worst PR move possible for the government. He confirms One Piece is real. On the world's biggest broadcast. You wanted to erase a myth, and the guy you're trying to bury literally yells, "The treasure exists, go crazy," and dies. Great job. Then Blackbeard strolls in and does his little endgame speed run, steals Whitebeard's power, and announces himself as the new era. Suddenly, the narrative isn't, the government killed the last threat. It's, oh, the pirates are evolving mid-episode. You can almost feel the Gorosei watching like, cool, we just accidentally soft-launched the final boss. And just when the whole thing is already a disaster, Shanks walks in and hard stops the war with pure presence. No army, no weapon, just conquerors' hockey and social pressure. The supposed rulers of the world blink. They accept his ceasefire. For a day that was supposed to prove their absolute power, they're the ones who flinch. I want to emphasize what that broadcast actually tells the world. The D aren't over. The Pirate King's will isn't over. The Age of Pirates is not closing. It's accelerating. Every kid who watched Ace die and heard Whitebeard scream about One Piece just got a side quest called Find the Truth. So what do you do when public executions don't work? You stop performing and start deleting. If Marineford was the failed stage play, then the later island erasures we see, the god-level no witnesses button Emu pushes, feel like the upgraded strategy. Don't make a symbol, don't make a martyr. Just remove the page from the book and pretend the chapter never existed. Which raises a darker question. If this is what they do to islands, what happens when the thing they're trying to erase isn't a place, but an entire century? Devil fruits, the magic system. That doesn't add up, and if you're trying to erase an entire century, you probably also want to control something else. How power itself works. Enter Devil Fruits, the series' big shiny magic system that absolutely falls apart the second you treat it like a natural phenomenon instead of a game mechanic with good PR. On paper, it's simple. You eat a weird fruit, you get a power, you can't swim. Paramecia change bodies or environments. Zoans let you turn into animals. Logias make you into an element. Then you get your little rare subtypes, mythical zoans, special paramecia, whatever category is this week, and it all looks nicely categorized. But here's an interesting thing. Nothing about this looks biological. We have no origin story, no devil fruit trees, no ecosystem, not even a fossil record. These things just exist. And when a user dies, the fruit respawns in the nearest normal fruit like it's on a cooldown timer. That's not evolution. That's a software license transferring devices. You can tell me that's just how it is in this world, to which I say, cool, but One Piece usually pretends its nonsense has rules. This is the one place where the rules feel kind of mythic and suspicious. Look at how bizarrely specific some powers are. Soap that washes away strength. A man whose body is doors. A guy who can wear you like a jacket. These are not, we adapted to an environment powers. These are, somebody thought this would be funny or narratively useful powers. Because as far as natural selection goes, the jacket fruit is losing to turn into magma every single time. And to be fair, the story knows this is weird. Vegapunk, literal top scientist on the planet, walking exposition machine, straight up admits he does not understand what devil fruits fundamentally are. He can imitate them with smiles, but badly. He can mass-produce artificial zoans, but they're glitchy, unstable, or emotionally off. He can copy the results, not the underlying idea. That's like being able to 3D print a phone that can't connect to the network. I want to emphasize how the sea reacts to all of this, because the language around it is not biology, it's curse. The sea itself rejects devil fruit users. They're called hated by the sea. Calm belts, sea kings, the whole oceanic climate of this world is treated like a semi-sentient judge handing down a sentence. That's not how you talk about a random allergy. That's how you talk about a broken contract. So, when you line this up with Mother Flame, ancient superweapons, and a rubber god of liberation whose power feels like wish fulfillment made literal, devil fruits start looking less like plants and more like artifacts, receipts from some lost civilization's big dumb experiment with reality. And if that's true, then the question stops being, what power would you eat? And becomes, what kind of world were these powers originally built for? And who paid the price when the bill came due? Are devil fruits actually ancient technology? And once you start thinking of devil fruits as artifacts, not apples, Vegapunk's little lore dump stops sounding like science and starts sounding like a confession. He literally tells us these are possibilities for human evolution made real. Not random mutations, not nature going, what if giraffe but cube? These are human desires, dreams, fantasies crystallized into a system of powers you can eat. That's not biology, that's UX design. Because as far as explanations go, the world's imagination leaked into reality is weirdly specific. Vegapunk doesn't say, they're mysterious gifts from the sea. He talks about a feedback loop between human longing and the devil fruit catalog, like the planet is running wish-based software. And to be fair, if anyone in setting is allowed to accidentally spoil the Void Century patch notes, it's the guy whose brain needed a hard drive extension. Here's an interesting thing. The moment you admit wishes can become fruits, the door is wide open for engineering, and Otis sprints through that door with smiles and Vegapunk's Zoans. Caesar smiles are the cursed bootlegs, sure, but they prove you can artificially invoke the devil fruit rule set. Vegapunk goes a step further and literally recreates Kaido's mythical Zoan. It's only a failure because the color is off, which is the most scientist thing I've ever heard. Functionally, it works. That means the mechanism is not just magical, it's reproducible tech, however janky. Now plug that into the mother flame. The world government is using a man-made energy source based on ancient blueprints to fire a weapon that deletes islands from the map. That is planet-scale technology. That is not a world that only recently figured out steam engines and cola cyborgs. That's a world living in the shadow of a civilization that treated continents the way Enel treats a random sky island, target practice. So the Great Kingdom starts looking less like lost Atlantis and more like Silicon Valley with nukes and a theology degree. If they had a global energy grid, a network of poneglyphs and weapons named after gods, why not a distributed power system built into living bodies? Devil fruits as externalized modules. You don't rewrite the base human OS. You hand people plugins. Want to talk to fish? Become lightning? Warp space? Cool, download the fruit. Probably tied to some world-scale machine or field that tracks who has what, which is a fun way to read the whole devil fruit reincarnation rule. But if the fruits are engineered, someone also engineered the downside. The curse? The sea's rejection. People like to say, oh, it's just balance, to which I say, balance implemented by who? Why does the ocean itself act like an antivirus program specifically targeting fruit users? And if the sea is punishing artificial evolution, what exactly did humanity do to the world that made the planet fight back in the first place? The sea's curse, a punishment or a failsafe? So let's actually sit with that for a second. The ocean is running antivirus software on human bodies. That's not a vibe, that's a system. Because as far as rules go, the devil fruit weakness is weirdly precise. You don't just get wet and slip a little. You touch the sea, or sea stone that mimics the sea's energy, and your strength gets hard deleted. Not your lungs, not your brain, just your ability to move and fight. Here's an interesting thing. That implies an interaction, not a superstition. The world is doing a very specific check. Are you running devilfruit.exe? Cool. Enjoy becoming a paperweight. And to be fair, we've been told this so many times it feels normal. But imagine any other series where magic users instantly sink in water. You'd call that a design choice, not a quirky curse, right? Now, zoom out and look at the actual ocean in one piece. It's a mess. Calm belts that are only calm in the no-wind, all-death sense. Sea kings the size of apartment complexes. Grand line weather that feels like the planet is pressing random on the climate menu every 5 minutes. It doesn't look like a stable blue marble. It looks like somebody tried to patch a broken world with duct tape and legendary sea monsters. People will say, well, it's just to make sailing interesting. To which I say, sure, and my router just happens to reboot every time I open too many tabs. When every major sea route is booby-trapped, when entire regions are naturally hostile to advanced navigation, it starts to feel less like flavor and more like containment. The world is hard mode by intent. So what if the curse of the sea is not punishment, but a planetary failsafe, a built-in limiter on reality warping powers? If devil fruits are the lingering tech or wish-based side effects of some ancient civilization, maybe the Great Kingdom, maybe something even older, then somebody at some point had the terrifying thought, what if everyone can rewrite physics on a Tuesday? I want to emphasize how scary that is in this setting. We already know the Void Century ended with world-scale warfare, ancient weapons that can erase islands, and a government so afraid of that history that just researching it is a capital crime. If that level of power was everywhere, all the time, the only thing between society and Minecraft creative mode with nukes would be a hard environmental countermeasure. The sea itself saying, you can break reality on land, but the moment you touch the global circulation system, you're done. And that raises the real question, who installed that failsafe? The Great Kingdom, realizing too late what they'd unleashed. An even earlier civilization that treated devil fruits like a bad software update they couldn't fully roll back. Or, and this is where it gets spicy, did the world itself respond, in the same way it seems to respond to certain people with the will of D? Because once you bring the world's will into it, Nika stops being just a goofy rubber cartoon god and starts looking like an exception in the code. The Nika Fruits user is literally called the Warrior of Liberation, a figure the world seems to wait for rather than reject. Everyone else with a fruit gets flagged by the ocean's antivirus, but this one power is described as bringing smiles, freedom, and the most ridiculous power in the world. So why does a system built to suppress reality hacks apparently cheer for the biggest hack of all? That contradiction is where this whole the sea is a failsafe idea stops being neat and starts being dangerous. Because if the ocean is a lock, Nika might be the master key, and the One Piece might be what happens when that key finally turns. Nika and the lie about Luffy's fruit. Because if Nika is the master key, then the first thing the world government did was scratch the label off the key ring. For 25 years, we all thought we were watching the adventures of a rubber man, to which I say, no, we were watching the world's most illegal punchline slowly boot up. Gear 5 finally drops, the drums start, Luffy dies harder than Ace for like 10 seconds, and then the Gorosei casually go, ah yes, the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika. Excuse me? You're telling us the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the baseline gag fruit of the series, was actually a mythical Zoan that can literally turn reality into Looney Tunes? That's not a twist. That's tax fraud on the metaphysical power system. Here's an interesting thing. They didn't just misfile it once. The government spent centuries actively hunting this fruit, renaming it, and burying its description so hard that even CP0 only talks about that troublesome rubber fruit. Who does that for a mid-tier paramecia? You don't deploy the Pope and 4 demon grandpas because some guy might become a bouncy castle. And, to be fair, this is where the devil fruit taxonomy starts looking less like science and more like propaganda. We're told there are 3 types: paramecia, Zoan, Logia. Nice clean chart, everyone goes home happy. But as far as the story shows, those categories are kind of a vague mess that can be bent whenever it's convenient. Now we have a Zoan that grants a historical role, a personality override, and physics-breaking toon force that out? Logius most logius. So what if the point of calling it rubber wasn't accuracy? It was containment. If you admit Nika is a god of liberation whose very existence encourages slaves to laugh at their masters, then suddenly you've acknowledged the Void Century, Joyboy, and the crime of just being free. Much safer to label it a quirky paramecia and pretend it's not the same archetype Emu has been trying to erase from history. I want to emphasize how perfectly Nika's powers line up with the themes the world government hates. Freedom of movement? Luffy's body ignores conventional restraints. Joy as a weapon? His laughter spreads like a virus, the exact opposite of Ohara's silence. Elasticity of reality itself? The guy grabs lightning, turns the ground into rubber, and treats gravity like a suggestion. That's not just a strong fruit, that's a jailbreak tool for the entire world. And once you see that, the classification system stops looking neutral. If one fruit's name is a lie, how many others are misclassified to hide their original purpose? Is human really what Chopper ate, or is that some downgraded relic of an ancient medical god? Are ancient zoans just cool dinos, or censored blueprints for living weapons tied to the Great Kingdom? The moment taxonomy becomes political, every label becomes suspicious. Hold that thought, because if the names are faked, the history attached to them probably is too. And that leads us straight into how the Void Century itself got patched over like a bad translation. Smiles, experiments, and the ethics of power. So if the Void Century is a bad fan translation of real history, smile is what happens when someone speedruns that same process on biology. You look at godlike powers, you go, we can probably bootleg that, to which I say, congratulations, you've invented cursed GMO geisha. Caesar Clown's smile fruits are the most on-the-nose, failed copy in the series. On paper, they're genius. Artificial zoans, mass-produced, industrial devil fruits for your favorite warlord or aspiring fascist. In practice, a 10% success rate and a 90% chance of becoming a permanently laughing victim who can't even cry about it. That's not a power system, that's a workplace safety video with extra steps. And I want to emphasize how specifically cruel that is. These aren't goofy gag characters. In Wano, entire towns are forced to eat smile scraps just to survive. They lose the ability to express grief in a country defined by grief. You watch people at funerals literally laughing because as far as their nervous systems are concerned, the dial is stuck on variety show. It's horror dressed up as slapstick. Here's an interesting thing. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Punk Hazard is basically the prequel set. Caesar's lab, Vegapunk's abandoned facilities, the giant kids, the failed dragons. The whole island is a graveyard of what if we made God tech but worse? The world government looks at devil fruits, at ancient weapons, at whatever the Great Kingdom was cooking, and decides the real problem was that not enough children were test subjects. Vegapunk's own artificial fruit, the pink dragon model, is treated like a punchline because Momonosuke is a dork, but conceptually it's terrifying. It proves that the government has been throwing money at devil fruit but controllable for decades. Smiles are just the cheap outsourced version. Caesar is the guy they hire when HR says Vegapunk's ethics policy is slowing down quarterly war profits. And then you stack that next to Dressrosa's toy curse. Different mechanism, same idea. Sugar's hobby fruit turns people into toys, erases them from memory, and Doflamingo uses that to build a fake utopia on top of a disappeared labor class. In Wano, smiles erase your ability to protest. In Dressrosa, the toys erase your ability to even exist in the conversation. It's two flavors of the same authoritarian smoothie. People like to say, One Piece is funny and lighthearted because clown pirates and rubber gags, and to be fair, it is. But the specific choice to make smile victims laugh forever? That's Oda screaming, this is what mass-produced divinity looks like in a broken world. You try to factory reset god powers. Without the original user manual, you don't get Joyboy. You get a supply chain of suffering with a smiley logo. And if Smile is the knockoff, What does that say about the original blueprint the government is chasing so hard? That's where we have to talk about whether devil fruits themselves might be artificial, or worse, intentional wishes someone already granted once. Ancient weapons, not just giant cannons. So if Smile is the bootleg devil fruit factory, we have to ask, what's the original brand name product the government is terrified of? And this is where the story quietly pulls out the label that says, "Do not use without 3 ancient weapons and a world-sized warranty." On paper, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus sound like the standard shonen DLC pack. Big ship, ocean mind control, sky laser. To which I say, if it were that simple, Emu would have just bought the season pass already. Because as far as the text is concerned, none of these things behave like normal weapons. They behave like pieces of infrastructure for a planet-scale system that's currently offline. Pluton is introduced as the ultimate warship, but notice how it keeps getting stapled to geography. The blueprints are in Water 7. The poneglyph is in Alabasta. The actual thing is implied to be buried in Wano, sealed off behind a country-sized dam. That's not a gun. That's a dry dock key. You don't park a single battleship under a closed nation for 800 years. You park something that only makes sense when the whole world layout changes. Poseidon is even louder about this. It's not a cannon. It's a person, Shirahoshi. She doesn't shoot beams. She talks to sea kings. And to be fair, I can ask the ocean's kaiju nicely sounds useless until you remember Noah, the gigantic ship just sitting above Fishman Island like a Chekhov's Ark. Joyboy's apology, the promise to move the island, the Sea Kings literally discussing guiding something huge. This is coordinated logistics. That's not a weapon. That's a migration tool. Here's an interesting thing. When you combine that with the fact Fishman Island is directly under the red line, the move the island someday promise starts to look like we're going to rearrange the map and we need a fish people evacuation plan. The world government isn't scared Shirahoshi will sink a few battleships. They're scared she'll press relocate on an entire species. Uranus is the vaguest, which is saying something in this mess, but every clue points up. Sky imagery, Emu's weird star map room, the mother flame-powered beam that erases Lulusia from above. I want to emphasize that Lulusia shot only makes sense if someone is already talking to a dormant, location-locked system in the sky. Mother Flame looks less like a weapon itself and more like the battery pack that lets Uranus boot back up. Put it all together with the red line being this suspicious, unnatural wall splitting the seas, and the ancient weapons start looking like tools for terraforming or, honestly, de-terraforming. Pluton to break land masses and reshape sea routes. Poseidon and Noah to move living things to where they're supposed to be after the reset. Uranus and Mother Flame to literally rewrite the weather and sea levels. If that's true, then the world's greatest treasure might not be gold at all. It might be the admin panel that turns this whole system back on. But who exactly has the permissions to log in? And what did the last Joyboy do with that access? Mother Flame and the power to erase islands. If the admin panel still exists, then we need to talk about the battery. Because as far as the modern era is concerned, the closest thing we've seen to the Great Kingdom's original power source is Vegapunk's cursed little passion project, the Mother Flame. Vegapunk straight up tells us he tried to recreate an ancient energy. Not invent, not discover, but recreate. That's a wild verb choice. You don't recreate fire. You recreate a recipe, which implies someone left instructions. And when that energy gets siphoned into a weapon, we don't get a big flashy war or some dramatic naval battle. We get Lulusia. One panel it's there, one panel it's gone, like Oda hit backspace on a country. Here's an interesting thing about Lulusia's erasure. It's not just an explosion. We see that weird, circular cloud formation, the beams of light dropping from above, the kind of weather pattern you'd expect if the sky itself had a targeting system. People like to say, "Oh, maybe it's just some random new cannon," to which I say, "Mate, your cannon doesn't rearrange the atmosphere into a perfect bullseye before it fires." The implication is that someone in Mary Joy's has access to a satellite-level weapon, a weapon that literally looks down on the world, picks a spot, and deletes it. That visual language is doing a lot of work. It's not just big gun go boom, it's the map itself is editable. And to be fair, that lines up way too cleanly with the vaguest, most undercooked ancient weapon we have, Uranus. Pluton is a ship. Poseidon is a person. Uranus, mysterious sky thing, that's the whole description. But if we combine that vague mess with the mother flame, suddenly Uranus looks a lot like a great kingdom orbital platform, or at least a weather-controlling, island-sniping nightmare that Immu can still poke from the throne. Not the full original system, probably, but a remnant, a replica, a bootleg apocalyptic app running on leftover hardware. And I want to emphasize, this is not just about war. If the world government wanted to flex, they'd nuke a Yonko base or wipe out a major marine trader. Instead, they aim it at a tiny kingdom that happened to shelter Sabo and hear a bit too much about Nefertari D. Lily and the Void Century. That's not strategy, that's censorship with extra steps. Ohara showed us the book-burning version of this impulse. Lulusia is the upgraded patch. Why burn the library when you can delete the country that read the books? The power isn't just kill a lot of people, it's remove a perspective from history so cleanly that future archaeologists don't even know where to start digging. So if Immu is willing to literally edit the world map just to keep one island's gossip from spreading, what kind of world-shaping mechanism are they so afraid of being reactivated? If this is the level of overkill for a rumor, what happens when someone reaches the actual control room instead of just the battery pack? Choice. Immu, the invisible king above the world. So if the mother flame is just the battery pack, then Immu is the person who stole the remote, swallowed it, and told the world, "Don't worry, nobody's in charge." Which is kind of impressive because, as far as lies go, "there is no king of the world" is a pretty bold one to tell when you are literally sitting on the king chair. Here's an interesting thing. The official story of the world government is actually kind of utopian. No single monarch, power shared by the Gorosei. The empty throne at Maria Joie as this big theatrical symbol that all 20 founding nations swore nobody would ever sit on. It's the political equivalent of saying, "We're all roommates here, no landlord," while quietly cashing everyone's rent. The empty throne is supposed to be the centerpiece of that idea. Public, ceremonial, very Instagrammable if Instagram existed. It's there to tell you, the viewer, that the system is safe because no one person can push the big red button. And to be fair, that's a strong image. But then we cut behind the curtain and see Immu casually strolling up to that same throne, like it's their office chair. So the symbol isn't a promise, it's a stage prop. The emptiness is part of the costume. People like to say, well, maybe Immu is just another committee member, to which I say, committees do not order the Gorosei around like nervous interns. Imu sits above the 5 supposed highest authorities, commands the erasure of whole islands with the mother flame, and has enough sway over the bounty and wanted poster system that they can literally curate who the world fears and who it laughs at. That's not a council. That's a monarch doing PR. And this has been going on for what? 800+ years. Either Imu is one very committed individual with an obscenely long lifespan, or the title of Imu is being passed down in total secrecy. Both options are a mess. Because if it's immortality, we're talking forbidden tech, or a devil fruit application the world government pretends doesn't exist. If it's succession, that means there's an invisible coronation ritual baked into the system that not even most celestial dragons know about. I want to emphasize how wild that is. The same regime that calls researching the void century a crime worse than mass murder is apparently fine maintaining a secret, possibly immortal overlord whose name isn't in any textbook. It turns the entire political structure into performance art. The reverie, the votes, the symbolic bows to the empty throne, those are all props in Imu's one-person show. So when we talk about Imu, we're not just talking about a final boss, we're talking about a human embodiment of the world's lie, a living contradiction that proves the no king narrative was fake from day one. And if the lie at the top is that big, what does that say about the history underneath it? Because the next layer down isn't just politics, it's the people Imu has been trying to erase since that first throne went empty. The Gorosei, priests of a fake reality. So once you've got a secret god sitting on the empty throne, you suddenly realize the guys in front of it aren't just politicians. They're clergy. The Gorosei are basically the Vatican, the CIA, and your high school principal rolled into one terrifying HR department for reality itself. Publicly, they're the calm grandpas of global authority. No worries, kids. The system's stable. Just pay your heavenly tribute taxes. Privately, they're Imu's hands. When a newspaper headline is a little too honest, they edit it. When a scholar connects too many dots, they erase the scholar. When an entire island like Lulusia accidentally stumbles into the plot, they literally delete the landmass from the map. People like to say, they're just bureaucrats with better robes, to which I say, normal bureaucrats don't have an island delete button, and I want to emphasize how direct they are with this stuff. The void century isn't some vague myth to them. It's a to-do list item that keeps regenerating. Ohara starts getting close to the truth of the Great Kingdom and the ancient weapons. Buster Call. Survivors like Robin escape and carry that knowledge forward. Lifelong global manhunt. Vegapunk pokes too hard at the past on Egghead. Starts connecting Mother Flame, ancient tech, and devil fruits as humanity's wishes. Suddenly, the Gorosei themselves are physically on site, personally monstering their way through an island that was supposed to be an untouchable government asset. Because, as far as they're concerned, the problem isn't just dangerous power, it's dangerous stories. Listen to their language. They don't say, "This boy is strong." They say things like, "The name must be erased, the light must be extinguished, that will cannot be allowed to spread." That's not a security briefing, that's a sermon. They're terrified of the D, not because Luffy or Law can punch hard, but because the very idea of an inherited will turns history into a contagious disease. Here's an interesting thing. Look at how they talk about Nika. The sun god isn't just a fruit power. It's a narrative problem. A rubber idiot who can literally turn suffering into laughter is more threatening to them than a battleship. Because you can sink a ship, but how do you sink a joke that keeps getting retold? Their solution is aggressively theological. Erase the name Nika, rebrand the fruit, kill anyone who gets too close to the myth, and if that fails, well, we've seen what they do to islands. And to be fair, they are consistent. Ohara, Lulusia, whatever they're planning for Egghead, entire nations are acceptable sacrifices if it keeps the museum exhibit tidy. Because that's what they're running. Not a government, but a curated display called the world. They decide which centuries get shown, which bloodlines get captions, which devil fruits are random instead of receipts from an ancient deal. So the real question isn't just, what did they hide? It's, what piece of the exhibit is so dangerous that even the curators are scared to look at it? That's where we're going next. Celestial dragons, parasites on a manufactured heaven. And if the exhibit is curated, then we should probably talk about the people who live in the gift shop. Because the most dangerous part of this whole lie isn't the erased century. It's the group that's been told, from birth, that the lie makes them gods. The celestial dragons are what you get if you take noblesse oblige and remove both the noblesse and the oblige. They literally live above the clouds in merry joies, waddling around in space cosplay bubble helmets like the air itself is too disgusted to touch them. Humans are furniture, slaves are disposable, and shooting someone in the street is treated like dropping a plate. And to be fair, Oda plays it so over the top that your first instinct is, okay, cartoon fascists, got it. But here's an interesting thing. Their divinity is entirely a history flex. Their whole "we are gods" branding is justified because their ancestors founded the world government and ended the Great Kingdom during the Void Century. That's the creation myth. They won the primordial war. They built the current system, so they get to sit on top of it forever. No one asks what that war actually looked like, because as far as the textbooks are concerned, the Great Kingdom was some vague evil empire, and the 20 kings were the heroic coalition. Except when we actually watch them operate, they have no real power in the practical sense. They don't command fleets. They don't strategize. They're not out here personally firing Uranus at islands. Their power is symbolic and narrative. A celestial dragon snaps their fingers, and an admiral moves not because of logistics, but because the story of the world says, these are the people you don't say no to. It's a vibes-based dictatorship. People like to say, well, the Gorosei and Imu are the real top. The dragons are just parasites. To which I say, exactly, that's the point. They're the decorative parasites that keep the whole ideological ecosystem stable. If the world believes that these clowns are living proof of divine right, then the system feels natural, even when it's a mess. Which is why the Void Century is such a problem. Any revelation that humanizes the Great Kingdom, that frames Joyboy as a betrayed ally instead of a cartoon villain, instantly nukes the origin story. If the founding war turns out morally ambiguous, or worse, if the evil empire was the one trying to share ancient weapons as sustainable tech, then what are the celestial dragons? Not gods, just winners of a very old PR campaign built on stolen technology and buried corpses. I want to emphasize how fragile that is. These are people whose entire identity rests on nobody reading the unabridged version of history. One poneglyph, one Ohara that doesn't get Buster called, one laugh-tale livestream, and suddenly Mary Joies isn't a holy land, it's a crime scene. So if the system has a weakest point, it's not the Marines or the Shichibukai or even the Seraphim. It's the idea that those bubble-headed parasites deserve heaven at all. And what happens to a fake heaven when someone drags the sky projector into the light? The world map is lying to you? So what happens when you drag the sky projector into the light? You realize the whole theater is built wrong, not just the story, the actual planet. The One Piece world map is basically a flat Earth meme that won the final boss fight. We're told this is normal. One giant, perfectly vertical red-line continent wrapping the globe, one perfectly horizontal Grand Line sea cutting through it, and 4 neatly boxed-in blues like someone hit grid layout on Google Earth. To which I say, mate, that's not a planet, that's a board game. This is Settlers of Catan, but with more slavery. Because as far as real-world geography goes, this thing is a mess. Continents don't form as single unbroken walls that just loop. Plate tectonics is chaos. You get jagged coasts, random islands, Australia. Ocean currents wrap, swirl, crash into each other. In One Piece, the red line and the calm belts act like hard dividers, carving humanity into 4 isolated pools that can't easily mix. How convenient for a government that really doesn't want people comparing notes. And to be fair, Oda leans into how wrong it feels. Reverse Mountain is literally water doing parkour. The calm belts are dead zones that just happen to perfectly cage the Grand Line. This isn't natural geography, it's a containment system. It's a prison layout with extra sea kings. Here's an interesting thing. Fishman Island. It's not just randomly under the red line, it's embedded in it, like the continent was built around an existing sea. The island needs a giant air bubble, artificial lighting, a candy factory economy just to function, and sitting nearby, in a cavern the size of a biblical guilt trip, is Noah, a ship explicitly meant to move the fishmen when the promised time comes. Move them where? Why would you need an evacuation arc if the current configuration was meant to last forever? I want to emphasize, the story keeps telling us this world is temporary. Joyboy's apology, Poseidon's power to command sea kings, Pluton being a literal island killer ship, Uranus nuking Lulusia off the map. These aren't just random superweapons. They're tools you'd use if you wanted to reshape continents and seas. Either the Great Kingdom tried to reformate the planet and got stopped, or the 20 nations won and locked the victory screen in place. So imagine this. The red line isn't a natural barrier, it's the scar. The Grand Line is the seam. The 4 blues are the broken shards of a single world ocean, and the One Piece, whatever form it takes, device, plan, punchline, is the key to hit undo, not metaphorically, physically. Break the red line, flood the gaps, and suddenly east, west, north, and south blue become one continuous sea. If that happens, the map we've been staring at for 1,000 chapters doesn't just update, it confesses. And if the planet itself is a forged confession, what else about reality in One Piece is literally man-made? Laugh Tale, the island that laughs at you. Because as far as forged realities go, Laugh Tale is the rudest one of all. It's the island that waits until you've risked your life, buried your friends, and toppled governments, just so it can point at you and laugh. We know the basics. Roger's crew gets there. They read the poneglyphs. They piece together the Void Century, Joyboy, the Great Kingdom, the ancient weapons, the whole world map scam, and they don't cry. They don't swear revenge. They burst out laughing. The supposed greatest crime in history, the truth that got Ohara nuked off the map, lands on the Pirate King as a punchline. And then you look at the name. For years we all called it Raftel, this vague mystical endpoint, like some JRPG final dungeon. Then Oda just walks in and goes, actually, it's Laugh Tale. Not just laugh tale like a giggle at the end, but tale as in story, as in the joke you tell at the bar. The official romanization is Oda screaming at us that this island is not just a location, it's a narrative structure. It's the last page of the script. Here's an interesting thing. If you treat Laugh Tale as a library instead of a loot cave, everything suddenly lines up. The Void Century, fully documented. The Great Kingdom's actual ideology and tech level, filed under things the celestial dragons are allergic to. The mechanism behind the current world shape, the red line, the calm belts, why the seas are sliced into 4 powerless aquariums, all diagrammed out like a science fair project from a civilization that got Thanos snapped. I want to emphasize that doesn't make it less horrifying. If anything, Roger's laughter is the scariest reaction possible, because what kind of truth makes a man like that laugh instead of scream? Probably one where the entire world government, Amu, the Gorosei, the Holy Knights, the Mother Flame, the genocide of Ohara, all of it, is them desperately trying to keep a cosmic-scale practical joke from getting out. Not because the joke is harmless, but because it exposes how stupidly, tragically avoidable the current oppression is. People say, maybe it's just a happy treasure ending, to which I say, then why is researching it a crime worse than mass murder? Why are indestructible poneglyphs needed just to preserve the lore? Why does every ancient weapon double as both apocalypse button and liberation tool depending on who understands the manual? And to be fair, that's where the One Piece itself walks in. It's not separate from this knowledge. It's the hardware to the software, the mechanism that only makes sense once you're in on the joke. You learn that the world is a rigged board game, then you get handed the rule-breaking piece that can literally rewrite the map. So, if Laugh Tale is the island that laughs at you, what exactly is it laughing about? And who was the original audience of that joke? Is the One Piece a weapon, a switch, or a joke? So let's talk about the stupidest, most overpowered object in fiction. A treasure that might be a joke, that might be a doomsday switch, that might also be an encyclopedia. This is not efficient storytelling. This is Oda putting every genre into a blender and hitting laugh. First, the basic pirate brain take. One Piece is treasure. Gold, artifacts, the accumulated flecks of the Great Kingdom. We've literally seen islands like Skypiea rain down mountains of gold, so imagining Laugh Tale as the final loot room kind of tracks. Maybe it's the hoard Joyboy gathered, the original poneglyph molds, ancient tech blueprints, a shipyard of Pluton-tier warships. People say, that's boring, just money, to which I say, have you seen what this cast does with pocket change? Frankie would industrialize joy itself if you gave him one ancient battery. Then we get the information enjoyers, the Rio Poneglyph crowd. In this version, the One Piece is the complete text of the Void Century, Joyboy's apology, the rise and fall of the Great Kingdom, why the D-Clan keeps photobombing every major war, the real deal on ancient weapons, and Imu. We know from Ohara that just reading this stuff is a crime worse than mass murder, which is a very normal and not at all suspicious legal standard. So the treasure is knowledge, the story that explains why the board is rigged in the first place. But here's an interesting thing. Information alone doesn't make Roger laugh. You don't stand on the final island, read a history textbook, and go, bah-ha-ha-ha. That's where the third camp comes in, the mechanism theory. The One Piece, as an actual device or system that can change the world's shape, sea levels, maybe even gravity. We already have precedent. Pluton is a ship. Poseidon is a person. Uranus is probably some sky-based superweapon or climate controller. The world's geography is a mess. A single vertical continent, insane currents, a calm belt that functions like a software wall. It looks less like natural planet and more like badly patched MMO map. So the hybrid idea is the one piece is treasure, but the treasure is a mechanism whose activation only makes sense once you understand the story behind it. It's the master switch built by the Great Kingdom, wrapped in gold and jokes. You read the Rio poneglyph, you realize the world is literally incomplete, and suddenly this giant machine or ritual or island-sized device stops being a random nuke and starts being the punchline, because as far as Roger's laughter goes, the funniest possibility is this: everybody is fighting over a broken beta version of the world. The joke is that the C's, the red line, even devil fruits, are patch notes from a cosmic mistake. And the one piece is the thing that lets Joyboy go. Okay, reset. Let's play the real game now. And I want to emphasize, if the world is the setup and the mechanism is the punchline, then what exactly is the cost of delivering that joke? Roger's choice, why he didn't push the button. The cost is that somebody actually has to press the button. And Roger, the guy who literally found the button, looked at it, laughed, cried, and went, "Yeah, not me." We know the scene in broad strokes. The crew reaches Laugh Tale. They learn the true history, see Joyboy's failure, understand the one piece, and they just burst out laughing. People like to treat that as, "Oh, it was just a funny treasure," to which I say, your entire crew does not ugly cry laugh over a pile of gold. That's the reaction of people realizing the world is a rigged game, and the punchline is cosmic. And to be fair, Roger immediately follows it up by saying they arrived too early. Too early for what exactly? Too early to win. Because as far as we can tell, Roger doesn't just shrug and retire. He disbands the crew. He sends Rayleigh into hiding, Odin back to Wano, scatters his monsters across the seas, and then he walks into Marine HQ and basically schedules his own execution. Who does that? A man who knows that his death at that exact moment is part of the activation sequence. My treasure? I left everything in one place is not a dramatic last flex. It's him booting up the Great Pirate Era as a global search algorithm. Here's an interesting thing. If the One Piece is a mechanism, it probably isn't a simple insert Pirate King, get new world system. The story keeps hammering that real power is conditional. Ancient weapons are tied to locations, bloodlines, forgotten tech. Poseidon needs Shirahoshi. Pluton needs Wano's borders opened. Uranus is tied to some sky-based, mother flame-adjacent nonsense. Why would the final mechanism be any different? Roger might not have had the right D-carriers, the right weapons awakened, the right world events lined up. The board just wasn't set. And I want to emphasize, this isn't just, "Oh, Roger was too weak." This is, if he forces it now, we get Void Century 2, World Harder. The Ohara incident already tells us that simply reading the script is a capital crime worse than mass murder. Imagine actually running the program. The last time someone tried to change the world's shape, we got a century of erased history, a shattered great kingdom, and a world government so scared they censor archaeology. Roger has read that spoiler chapter. He knows what a premature activation looks like, so he gambles on timing. He chooses to become a myth, to turn the seas into a chaotic, data-gathering mess of pirates, Ds, and weapons drifting toward each other. That's the great pirate era. Not freedom for freedom's sake, but a forced shuffle so the right hand can finally be dealt. Which brings us to Luffy. If Roger was too early, Luffy is the second attempt, the last safe chance to hit the button without deleting the save file. But what exactly makes Luffy's generation different enough that the system might not crash this time? Oda's language tricks, how the manga hides the truth. What makes Luffy's generation different is that we're finally reading the story in the right language. And I don't just mean not the 2003 scanlation where Zoro is called Zolo, and smokers' cigars are replaced with lollipops. Oda weaponizes wording. The text itself is part of the conspiracy, because as far as the manga is concerned, nothing in One Piece is just what it says on the tin. Take Kaizoku, Seigi, and Kami. On paper, pirate, justice, God. In practice, mood lighting. Kaizoku covers everyone from Arlong to Luffy to Buggy, the Clown Emperor. Same word, totally different moral weight. The Marines scream Seigi on their flags, but then you have Aokiji muttering that maybe the pirates have a point. And Kami? Enel calls himself a god. The celestial dragons act like gods. And then the story drops enemy of the gods on the D clan and just walks away. Who are the gods here exactly? Here's an interesting thing. The Void Century isn't just void in a cool, edgy way. The Japanese uses terms like Kongbai no Bai Nien, literally the blank 100 years, and words that imply erased or wiped out. That's different from forbidden or hidden. Forbidden history implies it's sitting there on a shelf with a do not touch sign. A blank century is someone taking an eraser to the page. Ohara isn't punished for opening a locked drawer. They're punished for proving the drawer ever existed. And then we get to D, which has been a translation minefield. Early fan scans loved Will of D as a big spooky proper noun, capital W, capital D, very dramatic. Official releases sometimes leaned on softer phrasing like inherited will, which is accurate but kind of sandpapers the teeth off it. When Sengoku calls them natural enemies of the gods, some fan translations made that sound almost mythological, while the official wording keeps it blunt, like a job description. I want to emphasize that those tiny choices change whether you read D, people as quirky fate children, or as an organized historical threat. Oda also recycles language like a man who lost his thesaurus in 1997 and decided that was a power move. Dawn, light, liberation, sun. He keeps hitting the same kanji clusters. The dawn of the world Robin reads about. Nika the sun god. Luffy's drums of liberation. The prophecy of a new dawn on Wano. This is all the same semantic neighborhood. You're supposed to feel that Joyboy's promise, Luffy's laughter, and the literal time of day are one system, not separate ideas. Is that subtle? Not really. Did a lot of us miss it for 20 years anyway? Absolutely. So when people say, Oda's just vibing, it's not that deep. To which I say, mate, the kanji disagree. The repetition, the flexible labels, the way justice and pirate and God keep swapping hats, all of that reads like deliberate scaffolding for a reveal that the current world is a temporary, artificial configuration, a save file over an older save file. And if the words are already telling us the world is fake, the next question is brutal. What language was used to write the original one? Fan translations, misreads, and accidental truths. If the original world was written in a lost language, we then did the funniest possible thing as a fandom. We immediately mistranslated the fake one. Because as far as English One Piece goes, we didn't start with hockey. We started with ambition, willpower, spirit, life force, and occasionally that thing Shanks does that makes people fall over. Early scan groups looked at Beichi and went, "Hey, ambition, close enough." And to which I say, same, I also passed my Japanese exams on vibes. But that one choice quietly warped the entire power system in our heads. If it's ambition, then suddenly hockey is a Shunin grit meter, not a structured sensory/armor/overlord toolkit. Here's an interesting thing. When Skypia's mantra showed up, a lot of us treated it as a totally separate monk power, because the translations framed it as this mystical sixth sense, not just observation hockey with a different cultural skin. So pre-time skip, fans built elaborate charts about devil fruits versus ambition versus mantra, as if Oda had 3 different systems when he was actually slow cooking one vague mess. And to be fair, the official side didn't help, because the anime was throwing out terms like color of arms and color of observation while the scans were still going. He used his spirit. The Void Century suffered the same fate, but quieter. Early translations of Ohara and the poneglyphs often sanded off the edge. Instead of a great kingdom that once ruled, you'd get a country that existed. Instead of the world's true history, you'd see the real story, or just lost history. That sounds nitpicky, but it makes the Great Kingdom feel like a trivia side quest instead of the main character the world government is still trying to kill. Poneglyphs went from indestructible records designed to outlive censorship to ancient stone tablets with clues, which is like calling a nuke a spicy rock. And yet, the lies sometimes looped back into accidental truth. Fan translators loved adding notes like, "This D might be an inherited will," long before Oda said those exact words. People wrote in the margins that devil fruits felt like forbidden wishes from an ancient civilization, which now sounds suspiciously close to the whole man-made/wish-based phenomena tied to a previous advanced world idea. You'd get speculation that the ancient weapons weren't just bombs, but systems that could literally change the seas. And suddenly, Egghead rolls around and goes, "Hey, what if we flooded the planet?" The gap between Japanese nuance and English wording also birthed entire fandom myths. Remember when some translations and wikis made it sound like advanced hockey techniques were post-time-skip-only inventions? The manga never said that. That was us, misreading tense and context, and then confidently posting power-scaling charts like we'd personally trained under Rayleigh, or the way those who can hear the voice of all things got flattened into Luffy's special hockey, as if it was a menu option you unlock at level 50. I want to emphasize, none of this is just pedantic wording drama. It's the theme externalized. Inside the story, the world government rewrites history. Outside the story, layers of fan scans, official edits, and YouTube explainers rewrite the rewrite. We weren't just reading about lies. We were building new ones in real time. So, if even the word hockey couldn't cross the ocean intact, what happens when we try to import something bigger than a word, like an entire erased civilization? Authorial intent. How Oda's vision evolved over 25-plus years. So when we zoom out from "a word couldn't cross the ocean intact," we hit the real heresy. An entire 25-year story somehow did. People love to say, Oda planned everything from day one, to which I say, sure, and I planned my life too. How's your timeline going? Here's an interesting thing. If we track the manga itself, you can kind of see the conspiracy slowly knitting together. Early East Blue is super vague. The Grand Line is just that scary ocean. The One Piece is some treasure, and the Will of D is literally a funny middle initial on a rubber moron who eats the first devil fruit we see. It's vibes, not a system. We hear about Roger. We hear about pirates chasing a dream, but Void Century? Zero. Completely redacted. Then Alabasta hits, and suddenly the lore gets teeth. Poneglyphs appear. Ancient weapons get name-dropped. The Nefertari family is weirdly important for no immediate payoff. That's the moment where it stops being silly pirate adventure and becomes, oh, history is a crime. But even here it feels like flexible placeholders. Pluton is a ship, or a blueprint, or a threat, or all three. Its power as a Schrodinger's battleship, post-Skypiea. The fog lifts a bit more. We get the Golden Bell, Roger's message, and Robin's whole life pivots around the Void Century. The word history suddenly has this radioactive charge. And to be fair, Oda has said in multiple interviews that he had the ending in mind early on, but not the exact route. That's basically author speak for, I know the punchline, I'm still workshopping the setup. Because as far as we can tell, D, the Void Century, and Devil Fruits started as three separate mystery buckets. D is people who smile when they die. Devil Fruits are weird ocean curses with fun powers. The Void Century is thing the government hates. Over time, you can literally watch Oda retrofitting them into one giant, unified lie. Sabaody is where bloodlines and history slam into each other. Celestial dragons, slavery, the supernovas, Kuma, the pacifistas copying a single man's body like a mass-produced myth. Marineford then weaponizes D itself. Ace, Luffy, Garp, Dragon, Blackbeard, all colliding in one war that screams, this initial is not random. And Dressrosa? That's where devil fruits, ancient tech, and political cover-ups crystallize. A kingdom erased once, then almost erased again. A toy curse rewriting memory, and a man hoarding the string-pulling power of a god. Is it messy? Absolutely. But I want to emphasize, it's a controlled mess. Oda keeps the systems vague on purpose. That vagueness is his editing bay. He can walk into an arc 10 years later and say, actually, that throwaway D guy, secret linchpin, that fruit, prototype of an ancient wish machine. Which raises the scary question, if the author's been quietly converging all these loose ideas for decades, what does that say about the final shape of the lie we're still inside? Retcons or long cons? Mantra, hockey, and presence. So let's talk about the moment One Piece literally turned vibes into a combat system, because as far as structural magic tricks go, hockey is Oda walking back into his own story and patch updating the firmware. Roll back to Chapter 1. Shanks walks onto the scene, glares at a Sea King, and the thing just has a panic attack and dies. Nobody says Conqueror's hockey. They say he has overwhelming presence, like he's a walking HR complaint. It reads as a one-off cool guy power, right? Then we hit Skypiea, and suddenly Enel and his priests are using mantra, this vague mind-reading, future-sensing thing that lets them hear voices across an island. Again, nobody calls it hockey. It's just, wow, sky people have Wi-Fi. At the time, a lot of us went, okay, unique island gimmick, sure. To which I say, mate, you're a unique island gimmick, because when we fast-forward past Marineford and slam into the time skip, Oda kicks open the door like, surprise, all those random auras. Actually, one system. Post-time skip, Rayleigh sits us down for the TED Talk. Observation. Hockey. Sensing emotions. Predicting movements. Hey, remember mantra? Armament hockey. Invisible armor. Hitting Logias. Suddenly, every cool blackened punch has a tax code. Conqueror's hockey. Knocking out fodder with your will. Shanks Sade, a presence with a brand name and a subscription tier. The series basically relabels half its old weirdness overnight. Skypia's mantra? Observation. Shanks in Chapter 1. Conquerors. Even that random spirit pressure moment from Luffy on Amazon Lily gets retroactively filed. So, is this a retcon or a long con? And to be fair, the answer is kind of both. Oda clearly had the idea of spirit power floating around early. He keeps using words like ambition, aura, life force. Very non-committal. Very, we'll fix it in post. Here's an interesting thing. By staying that vague, he buys himself the freedom to later say, "Oh yeah, that was hockey, totally planned," without actually lying. It was hockey, just not yet a three-branch, flowchart, wiki-breaking system. I want to emphasize how powerful that move is. Hockey goes from cool narrative vibe to formal mechanic over, what, a decade? And instead of snapping the story, it makes the world feel more intentional in hindsight. Your brain retcons itself. You reread Skypiea and think, of course, that's observation. What else would it be? Now scale that trick up. If hockey started as loose spiritual jazz and became a codified system, what do you think is happening with the Void Century? The D-Clan, Devil Fruits, even the One Piece itself? What if all the lies we're living in right now are just the pre-hockey phase of the biggest system Oda's ever building, still sitting in that deliciously vague present stage waiting to be named? Because once he finally slaps a label on that, the retroactive shockwave is going to make the hockey reveal look tame. Case study, Ohara's Last Stand revisited. So let's stress test that idea by going back to the place where saying the system's true name almost got a man vaporized mid-speech, Ohara. Because as far as narrative red flags go, ancient historian tries to say one word and the 5 most powerful boomers on the planet panic and press the delete button is not subtle. Clover doesn't get to finish the name of the great kingdom. He gets, what, half a syllable in? And the Gorosei instantly order his execution. No trial, no questions, just shut him up right now. People will say, well, they were just protecting a secret, to which I say, you don't kill the guy on the phone unless the sound of the word itself has power. That scene reads like the name is a verbal poneglyph, a kind of password that could sync up with the D, the weapons, maybe even laugh tail. The world government acts like if too many people hear it, the lie collapses in real time. Here's an interesting thing. Robin's flashbacks are basically the world's relationship to truth in miniature. You've got a kid whose crime is reading, asking questions, using a power she literally can't control yet. And the response isn't, hey, maybe chill on the forbidden archaeology. It's, you're a demon. Your mom is a terrorist. Your entire island is now a war crime. Ohara is what happens when curiosity meets a paranoid narrative machine. A town punished for reading might sound cartoonish, but that's the point. Oda takes book burning and dials it up to Buster Call so we can't pretend it's subtle. And standing in the middle of that mess is Jaguar D. Saul. The one Marine who goes, maybe don't murder the book club, just happens to carry the same initial as the people who keep breaking history open by accident. I want to emphasize how on the nose that is in hindsight. The D, doesn't just oppose the celestial dragons in big wars. It literally picks up a crying child of history, walks her out of the fire, and tells her to laugh. The preservation of forbidden history is not an abstract theme. It's a giant D-shaped man physically throwing it into the future. And to be fair, the government almost wins. The tree of knowledge burns, the island is erased, everyone dies, but the books don't. We watch them sink into the lake like a funeral, and years later, Vegapunk shows up and casually reveals, "Oh yeah, I salvaged the entire brain of this island." That visual is the whole series in one shot. Knowledge can be drowned, scattered, mislabeled as heresy, but it refuses to stay dead. You can bomb the library. You can't bomb the idea. Which is why, when we reread Ohara now, it feels less like a closed tragedy and more like a prologue. The last stand of the scholars is actually the opening move of the information age that's about to hit the One Piece world. If a single island's research can echo forward into Vegapunk, Robin, the revolutionaries, and the final war, what happens when the name Clover almost spoke finally gets said out loud on a global stage? Because that's when the lie stops being a background condition and becomes a collapsing system. And the next time someone tries to erase an island for reading, the world might actually be watching. Case study: Fishman Island and the Promise of the Surface. So if Ohara is what happens when you try to say the forbidden name, Fishman Island is what happens when you try to live under it. The lie about history becomes literal architecture, an entire race shoved under a rock because the sky is not for them. That's not subtext, that's zoning law racism. Here's an interesting thing. Fishman Island actually has its own embedded patch notes for the world in the form of a prophecy. The royal family's legend of a future king who will guide them to the surface, plus a princess who commands sea kings, is basically the tutorial text for how to uninstall racism from your ocean. Shirahoshi, being Poseidon, completes the system. A bloodline weapon whose power isn't blow stuff up, but move the entire board. If Pluton is a nuke, Poseidon is the moving company. And sitting right next to that is Joyboy's apology poneglyph. We treat it as this cute bit of lore to which I say, that's a war document. It's a written admission that he promised to bring fishmen to a different world configuration and failed. Why fail? Because as far as we can tell, the Void Century conflict never actually ended. The world government just rage quit and locked the map. Joyboy's side loses, the red line stays, the seas stay split, and the people who were supposed to be relocated get stuck under the enemy's capital. Noah's Ark is the physical proof. This thing is absurdly huge, parked under Fishman Island like a Chekhov spaceship, keyed to Poseidon and the Sea Kings. Its whole design screams mass migration tool, not cute tourist cruise. The Sea Kings talk about waiting for the promised day. The Ark is tied to the royal bloodline, and it's all positioned right under the red line, the literal pillar holding up Mary Joyce. The idea is obvious. You don't just move a few refugees, you move a civilization while you're breaking the world's spine. And then Luffy walks in and, in classic Luffy fashion, speedruns the moral choice. He promises to help Shirahoshi bring everyone to the surface, but he also tells her he'll destroy Fishman Island if it gets in the way. That's not empty shonen bravado. That's the story quietly admitting this location is a ticking time bomb. The bubble, the depth, the proximity to Mary Joyce. It's all unsustainable once the real war starts. And to be fair, if the One Piece is going to literally reshape the seas, being parked under Ground Zero is not ideal. I want to emphasize, Fishman Island is a test case. It's Oda running a small-scale simulation of what the One Piece is probably built to do globally, use weapons, bloodlines, and ancient tech to relocate oppressed peoples in a world whose geography is a prison. If one arc and one princess can move one race, what happens when you plug 3 ancient weapons, a D with Nika's fruit, and the truth about the planet into the same system? Because if Fishman Island is just the beta version, the full release might not stop at moving an island. What if it moves the sky? Case study: Dressrosa, Toys, and Forgotten People. What if Dressrosa was Oda literally running a Void Century speedrun? Same basic horror, smaller map, more toys. Because as far as test servers for world-shattering lore go, what if your dad is actually a stuffed animal is a pretty bold patch note. So, quick recap of Sugar's busted little power. The Hobby fruit lets her touch a person, turn them into a toy, slap a contract on them, and boom, instant slave. But the really disgusting part isn't the transformation, it's the memory wipe. The second she converts you, everyone who ever loved you just edits you out. Family, crewmates, the entire island's shared history, all patched into a new timeline where you never existed, while your actual body is still walking around doing forced labor under the palace. That creates this double reality. On the surface, Dressrosa is a cheerful tourist trap with gladiator shows and living toys as fun mascots. No missing person posters, no mass funerals, no "hey, didn't we used to have a king who wasn't a war criminal?" Underneath, it's a factory of stolen lives, a whole shadow population that literally can't be grieved because the grief trigger has been deleted. People like Kairos become urban legends in real time. And to be fair, that's way scarier than just killing everybody. Here's an interesting thing. That is exactly how the Void Century is described, just scaled up. A whole era, a great kingdom, Joyboy, ancient weapons, all turned into conceptual toys. The bodies are still here, ruined cities under the sea, poneglyphs carved by the Kozuki, Pluton schematics buried in Wano, a giant straw hat in Mary Joy's for some reason. The data exists. The world just doesn't remember its data. The official story says, "There was no great kingdom. Don't worry about it," while the ruins are screaming, "We were here." People like to say that's too on the nose, to which I say, have you seen Dressrosa? Oda literally shows us a live demo of world-scale censorship as a magic system. Ohara proves that simply researching that lost century is a bigger crime than mass murder. Dressrosa shows what it feels like from the inside when that crime succeeds. And when Sugar faints, the spell doesn't slowly decay, it snaps. Every toy pops back, every memory slams into place, and the island emotionally speedruns 10 years of grief in 10 seconds. Families reunited, soldiers realizing they've been serving the wrong king, history rewriting itself mid-battle. It's chaos, it's catharsis, it's a lore bomb. I want to emphasize, that's probably our preview. When the Void Century lie breaks, when Imu, the Gorosei, the world's true geography, all of it comes out, it's going to be Dressrosa, but planetary. Not a quiet museum update, but a mass psychic whiplash, where the entire globe suddenly remembers the toys it's been standing on. And if that's the rehearsal, what does opening the curtain on Laugh Tale actually look like? Case study: Wano, closed borders, and inherited wills. If Dressrosa was the rehearsal, Wano is the locked backstage door with a "do not enter" Joyboy only sign on it. The joke is that everyone else broke in first, because as far as closed countries go, Wano isn't just isolationist, it's basically on airplane mode from the Void Century onward. Here's an interesting thing. Wano used to be allied with the Great Kingdom. The same Great Kingdom, the world government, turned into Voldemort. You're not allowed to say the name. You're barely allowed to think the idea. The Kozuki clan didn't just rule some quirky samurai island. They literally carved the poneglyphs, the only indestructible receipts of that erased history. So when we talk about closed borders, we're not just talking about xenophobia. We're talking about a firewall around the server that still has the original files. Odin is where that firewall starts to crack. He sails with Whitebeard, then with Roger, hits Skypiea, Fishman Island, Zoo, and finally Laugh Tale. He reads Joyboy's apology to Poseidon. He learns about the ancient weapons, the true geography, all of it. And he comes back and says, Wano's borders must be opened for the day Joyboy appears. Not for trade, not for tourism, but as a timed switch in a long-delayed world-scale mechanism. To which I say, that is not how normal feudal lords talk. And to be fair, Odin fails spectacularly. But look at what replaces him. Orochi's paper-thin shogunate propped up by Kaido looks like a personal revenge story, right? Orochi hates Wano. Kaido wants a war playground. But the structure of it is suspiciously convenient for the world government. A Yonko squatting on the last major poneglyph factory, wiping out Kozuki stonemasons, industrializing weapons exports, and keeping the borders sealed so nobody can check what's under the floorboards. You cannot tell me that's not useful if you're trying to keep the Great Kingdom's legacy buried. Then we have Momonosuke, who is kind of the anti-Orochi. He's a scared kid, fake dragon, fake age, but he has one absurd power. He can command Zunesha. This isn't just a cool flex. It's the same design philosophy as Shirahoshi being Poseidon. Ancient weapon, not a gun. A person. A bloodline key that interfaces with some gigantic ancient system. Zunesha as walking punishment. Shirahoshi as Sea King router. Momo as admin login. I want to emphasize how weird it is that the weapons are literally children. So Wano opening isn't just national policy, it's a prerequisite checkbox. The poneglyph makers rejoining the world. The Zunesha keyholder installed as Shogun. The borders unlocked, so whatever the One Piece actually does doesn't instantly collapse a sealed, brittle country. If the treasure can reshape seas or even gravity, you need Wano online first. And if Wano is step one, what other locked regions and bloodline keys are still waiting to flip their switches? The system is a mess, and that's why it works. So when people say, the lore is a mess, none of this lines up, our answer is kind of, yeah, and? Because as far as fictional universes go, One Piece is that guy whose room looks like a crime scene, but he can still find his tax documents in 3 seconds. It looks chaotic, but the chaos is doing actual narrative work. Let's air out the usual complaints. Power creep, hockey suddenly being everywhere, devil fruits that feel like they were made up the night before the chapter, Void Century info being drip-fed at the pace of a leaky faucet, retroactive connections where you go. No way Oda planned that back in Chapter 12. People call it a vague power system duct-taped onto an already huge world, to which I say, yes, and that duct tape is what lets him keep building the spaceship while it's already in orbit. Because the second you hard define everything, you're stuck. Look at more rigid shonen systems where we get charts, categories, elemental wheels, color-coded rankings. It's fun, But once the author says, "This is the ceiling," every future twist has to break their own rules or invent a new exception. One Piece goes the other way. Hockey starts as ambition and presence. Devil fruits are weird ocean curses. The ancient weapons are big scary things. And that strategic vagueness gives Oda insane freedom to recontextualize old scenes without snapping the timeline in half. Here's an interesting thing. Ohara tells us that simply researching history is a crime worse than mass murder. But we don't get a full void-century data dump. We get charred books, half-remembered names like Joyboy, and poneglyphs scattered by the Kazuki clan. That's not a lore failure. That's the exact feeling the story wants. We're supposed to be squinting at scraps, trying to guess what the Great Kingdom really was, the same way Robin is. When Imu casually erases an island, or the Gorosei mention the Mother Flame, it doesn't plug into a neat chart. It plugs into a vibe. These people know something we don't, and the narrative is actively censoring itself in-universe. I want to emphasize how elegant that is. The uncertainty around devil fruits, are they wishes, science, a deal with some ancient god, matches the way the characters treat them. Terrifying, miraculous, poorly understood. The D, lineage, being this running question mark, the world's geography feeling off, Laugh Tale being literally a punchline nobody is allowed to hear yet. All of that mess mirrors living under a lie. We're not omniscient readers. We're citizens in the world government's information prison. And to be fair, this approach does create contradictions, or at least moments that feel like them. But the trade-off is a world that still feels alive and editable after 1,000 chapters. Oda can introduce the Mother Flame, or reveal that an island was never an island, and it clicks into that pre-existing fog instead of bouncing off a rigid rule book. The system is a mess, but it's a functional mess, thematically aligned with a world that has been deliberately scrambled. The real question is, if the story is built to keep lying to us, what happens when it finally has to tell the truth, and what does that do to the One Piece itself? Why the world government's lie is already crumbling. So here's the problem with building your entire world on a lie. At some point, the lie has to pass a stress test, and One Piece is now basically the SOT for the world government. The narrative has hit that phase where every time they try to patch one hole, 3 more spring open, like it's a very authoritarian game of whack-a-mole. Because as far as total information control goes, they already lost at Ohara. The whole point of that massacre was, erase the books, erase the scholars, erase the question, except the books didn't burn. Saul and the giants smuggled them out. Elbaf is basically sitting on a backup hard drive of the truth, and Robin survived with the knowledge to read poneglyphs. You don't come back from that. That's not a crack. That's someone leaving the void century in the shared Google Drive. And then Vegapunk defects. The guy who literally runs their science system spends decades reverse engineering the ancient kingdom, then goes, "Actually, I'm going to live stream the forbidden lore." The Mother Flame, the energy research, the explanation of devil fruits as wish-based ideas from a previous civilization, that's not just a leak. That's the architect of your propaganda machine hitting reply all. Here's an interesting thing. Sabo and the Revolutionary Army are doing the same thing from the opposite direction. Sabo witnesses the reverie, sees Imu's silhouette on the empty throne, escapes Lulusia's erasure, and now the Revs are openly attacking Holy Land supply lines and Tenryubito assets. The world government told everyone the throne was empty. Sabo's entire current character arc is just him screaming, "No, it isn't. I was there." And to be fair, this didn't start yesterday. Marineford already broke the seal on public doubt. The whole world watched the Marines execute a man live on TV, fail to protect their own symbol of justice, and then get flexed on by a single Yonko. You can't go back to absolute justice PR after Whitebeard literally announces the One Piece is real. Then Dressrosa happens, Doflamingo gets exposed as a celestial dragon arms-dealing string gremlin, and suddenly the warlord system looks less like stability and more like crime subscription service. Pattern interrupt, and then a country just vanishes. Lulusia gets Thanos beamed off the map by Emu and Uranus, or whatever that was, and the official story is nothing. No explanation, no cover story, just a blank spot on the map. How do you keep selling the lie when people can see the hole where their relatives used to live? Hovering over all of this is Shanks. This red-haired, war-stopping enigma casually walks into the room of world lies to talk with the Gorosei about a certain pirate. Is he managing the transition, slowing it down, or quietly accelerating the collapse so it doesn't take the planet with it? We don't know. And to which I say, that ambiguity is the point. He's the one character who can shake hands with both the old lie and the new truth. I want to emphasize how many factions now hold puzzle pieces. Robin, the Giants, the Kozuki, Vegapunk, Dragon, Sabo, Blackbeard, even rogue Marines like Garp and Sword. Each has a shard of the forbidden picture. Total suppression is not just unlikely, it's structurally impossible. Any attempt to clamp down now only raises the pressure, and when a lie this big finally blows, it doesn't pop. It detonates, which brings us to the terrifying part. If the lie is already crumbling, what kind of world needs a treasure like the One Piece to finish the job? What happens when the One Piece is finally used? So here's the cursed take. The One Piece isn't the reward at the end of the story. It's the detonator you press when you're okay with never going back. People keep imagining it as a big chest of gold or a meme about friendship, to which I say, sure, if your idea of friendship involves tectonic war crimes. We've been building this hybrid theory all video, the One Piece as both mechanism and knowledge. It's not just a button, it's an instruction manual for the button, a user agreement for the ancient weapons, and a tutorial on which bloodlines and islands you need to sync up. Pluton under Wano, Poseidon in Shirahoshi, Uranus as this vague sky god system Emu is hoarding. None of them are standalone nukes. They're components in a global operating system that only boots when the right people in the right places make the same choice at the same time. And what does that system actually do? The most popular idea is also the most narratively clean. It destroys the red line and unites the seas. Because as far as physical metaphors for segregation go, you literally cannot beat a planet-sized racist wall. Imagine the red line collapsing, Marie-Joie sliding into the ocean, Reverse Mountain losing its purpose as the world's worst boat ramp, and all four blues bleeding into one massive, chaotic all-blue. Sanji's dream stops being a cute cooking side quest and becomes the visible proof that the lie is over. Here's an interesting thing. That kind of change doesn't just give us cool new maps. It instantly breaks the celestial dragon's power. Their whole deal is being physically above everyone, guarded by impossible currents, secret routes, and a monopoly on true history. You flood their holy land. You erase the geography that props up the theology. Suddenly, Fishman Island isn't a way station under their heel. It's part of the surface. The Grand Line's artificial difficulty curve collapses, trade routes explode, and the world government's logistics go from oppressive efficiency to we lost 3 admirals in traffic. The immediate fallout would be a mess. Mass migrations, whole kingdoms underwater, others suddenly central instead of remote. Imagine East Blue villagers realizing they can just sail to the former holy capital next year. Imagine Alabasta's desert economy when new currents shift. And to be fair, that's the optimistic version. We're talking refugee crises, resource wars, and every petty warlord with a ship trying to carve out their own new Maria Joie before anyone can build a better system. Now, layer the emotional bomb on top. Ordinary people find out their maps were fake, their religions were celestial PR, their heroes were edited, and the criminals, like Ohara, were the only ones telling the truth. How many island cults collapse overnight? How many nations double down and call the New World heresy? You thought Skypia's Shandian conflict was messy. Scale that to the entire planet. And right in the middle of that is Luffy, not just as Pirate King, but as the guy who pulled the trigger knowing it would hurt. I want to emphasize how brutal that role actually is. Joyboy failed once. His apology to Fishman Island is literally carved in stone. Luffy's version of joy isn't avoiding the pain. It's charging straight through it and refusing to let anyone face it alone. He's the facilitator of the ugliest, loudest group therapy session in history, breaking the world so it can finally keep the promise it made 800 years ago. The real question is, once the seas are united and the lie is dead, who gets to decide what replaces it? The real treasure, a world without a script. And this is where the series quietly pulls the rug on us, because as far as freedom goes, One Piece has been lying to its own characters from Chapter 1. Everybody in this world is screaming about freedom. Pirates toast to it. Revolutionary Army speeches name drop it every 5 seconds. Even Blackbeard does his whole "people's dreams never end" bit like he's running a problematic TED Talk. But look at how most pirates actually live. They're still chasing bounties the world government prints, sailing routes the world government mapped, reacting to marines that the world government sends. They call it freedom, but it's freedom inside a fenced-off playground. You can pick any slide you want, you just can't leave the park. To which I say, that's not freedom, that's an open-world game with invisible walls. Here's an interesting thing. Luffy's dream keeps sounding selfish and tiny on purpose. "I want to be king of the pirates" is such a dumb, kid-brain sentence that even other characters go, "That's it?" But the longer we go, the more it reads as structural vandalism. King of the pirates, in this context, means person who breaks the system where you're born pre-installed with a role. Slave noble fishman, Tenryubito D. All of these are basically hard-coded character classes in a world-sized MMORPG you did not consent to log into. I want to emphasize how deep that script runs. The Void Century gets erased. The Great Kingdom is rebranded as the bad guy. The D becomes a cursed middle initial. Geography itself is weaponized. A giant stone belt around the planet. A vertical ocean highway. Red line up here. Fishman Island literally shoved under the noble's feet. That's not just world building. That's stage design. Immu and the Gorosei aren't just rulers. They're showrunners, making sure their canon stays intact. So when people say, the One Piece is probably just a big pile of gold and a funny joke, and to be fair, that would be very Oda, I think they're missing the real power fantasy. The treasure that terrifies the world government isn't money. It's a blank page. A mechanism, maybe tied to the ancient weapons, maybe to that mother flame tech, that can literally redraw the map, drop the red line, unite the seas, and expose the actual script they've been running since the Void Century. That's why poneglyphs matter more than any devil fruit. They're cheat codes slipped into the margins of the world's screenplay by the Kozuki clan, indestructible footnotes saying, "By the way, this whole thing is a lie." And when Luffy reaches Laugh Tale, the value isn't just in knowing the joke, it's in having the receipts to walk back on stage and say, "New story now, nobody gets assigned a role at birth again." All that dawn and light imagery, it's not just about illumination, it's about ending an artificially extended night where the audience forgot the show was scripted. The Ohara scholars tried to flip the lights on and got vaporized for it. Joyboy promised a sunrise and failed. Luffy is the third attempt, the guy reckless enough to rip open the curtains and let the sun nuke the set. But if you burn the script, what stops the next tyrant from writing an even worse one? How this changes the way you reread One Piece. So what do we do with that? If the world is a rigged stage and the script is propaganda, how do you, a person with a functioning brain and probably too much free time, reread One Piece without going insane? The first upgrade is stupidly simple. Every time lore drops, pause and ask, who is talking right now? Because as far as this world is concerned, a Marine Vice Admiral, a drunk pirate, a revolutionary, a scholar, and a celestial dragon are not describing the same planet. When Sengoku explains the Great Pirate Era, that's HR doing a safety briefing. When Whitebeard talks about the One Piece right before dying, that's a guy rage-quitting the company and leaking everything on his way out. I want to emphasize how much this reframes early arcs. Nami talking about Arlong's tyranny is not the same kind of history as a world government wanted poster. Robin reading a poneglyph is not the same as a CP9 agent bragging about justice. Even a gag like a celestial dragon calling fishmen subhuman is a lore drop. That's the script talking. To which I say, if someone with a sky treadmill and a bubble helmet calls you subhuman, you might actually be the protagonist. Here's an interesting thing you can actually do on a reread. Start tracking phrases and symbols like you're building a conspiracy corkboard. Dawn. Light. Inherited will. Enemy of the gods. Sun motifs, bubbles, chains. Every time they show up, note who says them and whether it's played as a joke, a hymn, or a threat. When Wano talks about opening the borders at dawn, when Skypiea worships God on a literal sky island, when Doflamingo rants about the gods of Maria Joie, it's the same vocabulary being used to sell 3 different lies. And to be fair, this is where all those filler-feeling arcs suddenly stop being skippable. Skypiea is a test run for a sky-based ancient weapon, complete with a bell that literally broadcasts history. Thriller Bark looks like a Halloween detour, but it's a mass grave science project about stealing shadows, bodies, and identities in a world obsessed with erasing names. Dressrosa is just sad toy country until you realize it's a case study in how to overwrite reality itself, change memories, rewrite history, crown a puppet. Try reading the whole thing like a mystery novel where we weirdly already know the treasure is real. So the question shifts from, does the One Piece exist, to, what is so wrong with this world that a joke, a song, and a smile are considered weapons of mass destruction? Every poneglyph, every cover story, every random war is another clue about the original crime, what the world government did to the planet. And finally, treat your own past assumptions as part of the game. The joy isn't just Oda tricked us, it's realizing we helped. We laughed off Emu sitting on the empty throne. We shrugged at Enel's moon trip. We accepted that the map was the map. Rereading with this lens is like discovering you were an extra in the conspiracy the whole time. And the next section is where we start asking what that makes us root for when Luffy actually finds the answer. Common theories that don't survive this framework. So if rereading turns you into an extra in the conspiracy, this is the part where we have to talk about the fan theories that are basically background NPCs too. Because as far as wild ideas go, some of the popular ones are not revolutionaries. They're just that guy in Logtown yelling, "Gold!" Let's start with the classic. The One Piece is just a big pile of treasure. Mountains of gold, some jewels, maybe a crown, roll credits. To which I say, cool, but then why is the world government more terrified of one island than of Whitebeard punching the planet? Ohara gets nuked for reading a history book. Roger dies laughing at a joke, and we're supposed to believe the punchline is inflation? If it's only money, you don't need an erased century, indestructible poneglyphs, and a fake world map. You just need better banks. Here's an interesting thing. Shallow D theories do the same move. The will of D is just people with strong wills. Great, so as Katakuri secretly, Monkey D. Katakuri now, the D shows up at the execution of Roger, in Luffy, in Teach, in Law, in Ancient Enemies of the Celestial Dragons, always orbiting world-shifting events, and we're calling that they try really hard? I want to emphasize, if your explanation still works when you delete the Void Century, Joyboy, and the idea of repeating world cycles, it's not an explanation. It's a vibes check. Devil fruit origin theories get even messier. They're just random nature magic or a demon tree did it, which sounded cool on forums in 2008, but we live in the Vegapunk era now. The man literally tells us, fruits are crystallized desires, humanity's wish to stretch, burn, fly, control time, whatever, and we've seen Mother Flame, a man-made sun bomb plugged straight into the ancient power grid. Any theory that doesn't weld those together into one system is kind of ignoring the actual text. If you pretend Mother Flame and the ancient tech don't exist, you're basically doing Void Century denialism. And then we have ancient weapons as just really big nukes. Pluton is tied to Wano's locked geography. Poseidon is a specific mermaid princess in a specific bloodline. Uranus is probably a sky or orbit-level thing connected to the world's shape. These aren't generic bombs, they're keys that only fit if the continents, the sea levels, and the right people line up. Calling them nukes is like calling the Red Line a slightly tall speed bump. Technically, a barrier completely misses the point. What all these comfy, surface-level theories share is that they treat history, power, and geography as separate. Gold over here, D over there, devil fruits in a magic box, ancient weapons in the basement. And, to be fair, that worked when the story was small. But once you accept that the map is a lie, the sea is a machine, and powers are humanity's receipts for past desires, any satisfying idea has to hit all three: the erased history, the power system, and the broken planet. Next, we're going to try to build one that actually does. T. Why Oda won't Game of Thrones the ending. So once we start throwing around change the shape of the planet as a plot point, people immediately go, "Oh no, he's going to Game of Thrones this, isn't he?" To which I say, you are severely underestimating the man who made a whale setup pay off 400 chapters later by giving him a skeleton musician with depression. Because, as far as long-term payoff goes, Oda's track record is actually kind of disgusting. Laboon is a gag in East Blue, right? Funny sad whale, everyone moves on. Except he doesn't move on. He turns that into Brook's entire backstory, ties it into the promise of the Rumbar Pirates, and suddenly a throwaway joke becomes one of the most emotional reunions we're probably ever going to see. Same with Skypiea. Everyone called it a filler island with a drum god and a cloud snake, and then years later it's the lore Rosetta Stone for the Great Kingdom, moon robots, and ancient weapons geography. Here's an interesting thing. Even when he retcons emotionally. Sabo's survival is absolutely a retroactive idea. You can feel the editorial meeting, but the way it's executed? It doesn't break Ace's death. It reframes it. It gives Luffy another inherited will, another failure, another reason the Revolutionary Army actually matters. That's the pattern. He'll bend plot logic before he breaks the emotional spine of the story. And Haki is the same slow-burn mess in the best way. Pre-time skip. It's Shanks scaring a Sea King. It's mantra in Skypiea. It's ambition. Vague. Spooky. Cool. Years later, we get the formal three-type system. Advanced branches, future sight, internal destruction, conqueror's coding. Does every pre-time skip elite logically have it? Not really. But the emotional function stays consistent. It's willpower made visible. It's freedom punching through reality. That bodes very well for an ending where the lore explodes, but the feelings still make sense. I want to emphasize that the core themes are actually stupidly simple. Freedom, inherited will, found family, laughing in the face of oppression. You can stack as many void century flowcharts and D-lineage conspiracy boards on top as you want. Those four ideas are the bedrock. As long as the final reveal lets Luffy choose freedom over control, lets the D smile in the moment everyone else would kneel, and protects his weird little pirate family, it's going to feel coherent even if the world turns upside down. Literally. So, the One Piece, whatever it is, probably lands in that obvious in-hindsight zone. The kind of thing where you go, of course it had to be that. What else would tie together a fake map, a broken sea, wish-based devil fruits, and a government terrified of a joke? That's not impossible. That's exactly how Laboon, Skypiea, Sabo, and Haki already work. The real risk isn't, will he explain everything? It's, how much is he going to leave intentionally blurry so the world still feels alive after the last chapter? And to be fair, that's where people might get mad. Because do you really want every ancient weapon blueprint, every emu motive, every D family tree spelled out? Or do you want just enough to start your own crack theory video? Next, we're going to push that fear to the limit and sketch an ending that walks that exact line. Your favorite gags might be world-ending clues. So when we say Oda might leave the ending intentionally blurry, that doesn't mean you're getting nothing. It means you're getting it in the stupidest possible packaging. Because every time this man makes you laugh, there's a non-zero chance he's also quietly setting up the apocalypse. Think about Buggy. Early on, he's a literal clown whose power is, what if chop chop fruit, but also emotional damage to Zoro's dignity. We all collectively filed him under joke villain, and then, piece by piece, he becomes a pillar of the Cross Guild, a fake Yonko, and a walking commentary on how symbols of power are manufactured. The gag of Buggy always fails upward mutates into a serious idea. The world will follow whoever looks like the winner. That's not just comedy. That's propaganda studies with red-nose accessories. Same with Foxy. The Davy backfight is this goofy filler-feeling arc where Luffy stretches his face for 10 pages and everyone's IQ drops by 30. To which I say, cool, now rewatch it, knowing it's a test run for pirate alliances, crew stealing, and the legalistic games the world government is playing with the entire pirate era. It's a parody of dumb pirate games that also quietly explains how reputations and crews can be reshuffled like trading cards. And Laboon, on paper, giant suicidal whale headbutting a wall for 50 years. Funny, silly face, memeable, but the longer you sit with it, the more it's a thesis statement about promises that outlive nations. Because as far as void century allegories go, something huge smashing against an artificial barrier, waiting for a promised return that history says is impossible, is not exactly subtle. Here's an interesting thing. Oda uses the dumbest panels to smuggle in the heaviest exposition. Background maps during party spreads that vaguely warp the world's shape. Drunk Marines joking about that incident 800 years ago like it's office gossip. Ancient ruins drawn behind someone doing a spit take. If he put that stuff in a solemn lore dump, you'd skim it. Wrapped in a joke, your guard drops, and the lie walks right in. We see it with devil fruits, too. People slipping on peels, goofy transformations, someone turning into a literal jacket. And to be fair, it looks like pure chaos. But then you remember Ohara was erased just for asking what these powers are. And suddenly, that throwaway gag about fruits granting wishes starts sounding like a red flag from an extinct science project. I want to emphasize, this tonal whiplash is not an accident. It's a training regimen. You get conditioned to treat the story like a comedy. So when the truth shows up dressed as a punchline, you don't flinch. By the time we reach Laugh Tale, we're basically lab rats who laugh when the lore electrocutes us. So, homework time. What's your favorite just-a-gag moment that now feels suspiciously important? The guy in the background, the stupid face, the map you never looked at twice. Because next, we're going to take that exact paranoia and aim it at the ending itself. What if the final punchline is the biggest lie of all? From pirate adventure to cosmic conspiracy. So if the final punchline might be the biggest lie, we kind of have to ask, when did this stop being a goofy pirate romp and turn into a cosmic tax audit on reality itself? Because, as far as East Blue is concerned, One Piece is the most honest series in the world. Think back to Romance Dawn through Arlong Park. The system of the story is tiny and personal. Luffy punches a corrupt marine, frees a town from a clown, helps a liar, a coward, a thief, and a fraud become better versions of themselves. The power structures are cartoonishly simple. Local marines bad, small-time pirates worse, our rubber boy best. The biggest institutional evil is literally that one jerk with an axe hand. If you tap out here and say, it's just a fun pirate story, to which I say, yeah, based on the evidence you have, that's actually fair. But then the camera starts pulling back. Alabasta quietly upgrades the stakes from villain owns a town to villain owns a country and works for a secret government cartel. Skypiea turns a Sky Island gag into a parable about erased history. By the time we hit Enya's lobby, we're not fighting a bad marine captain. We're storming the world government's judicial island, burning the flag of the people who literally decide what is true. Here's an interesting thing. The genre has shifted, and nobody sent us an email. What began as adventure comedy is now a prison break from reality itself. Marineford pushes this even further. The conflict isn't, will Luffy save his friend? It's, will the era itself change on live TV? Admirals, warlords, Yonko, the whole institutional mess shows up. The word D stops being a funny middle initial and starts feeling like a banned search term. Every punch is also a press release about how this world is supposed to work. Then Wano arrives and retroactively infects everything. Suddenly, that quirky samurai detour is a flashpoint between Yonko, ancient weapons blueprints, void century secrets, and a closed nation that once carved indestructible history stones just to spite censorship. We're still doing gags, but every joke is taped to a conspiracy corkboard. The more Luffy sails, the more the curtain gets yanked back, and I want to emphasize the pacing of that reveal is why the lie works. You acclimate. You don't notice the water boiling, and to be fair, this is why a lot of people still describe One Piece as light-hearted pirate adventure. If you only remember Usopp lying about goldfish, and not the part where researching history is treated as a crime worse than mass murder, you're not wrong. You're just watching a different genre. But now, in the final saga, the conspiracy has stopped being background flavor and become the main course. Imu steps out of the silhouette. Islands vanish. Mother Flame nukes the map. The world government isn't a distant bureaucracy. It's an active villain with a weather machine. The Yonko aren't just big pirates. They're rival claimants in a war over what the world is allowed to be. Devil fruits, the funny powers, are being reframed as receipts from an ancient wish-based science project. The story has finally admitted what it's been doing for 1,000 chapters. This was never just about finding treasure. It was about proving the world itself has been edited. So if the genre quietly shifted from pirate adventure to cosmic conspiracy, what does that do to the supposed happy ending? Next, we need to talk about why the truth might actually be the most dangerous thing Luffy can find. So, is everything you know about One Piece a lie? Short answer, kind of yes, kind of no, and very aggressively, it depends in a way that only a man who drew a reindeer in a hat and then built a war crimes conspiracy around him could pull off. Let's recap the actual crime scene. The world's history? Fake. The Void Century is treated as a sin just to research. Ohara gets erased harder than a failed SBS doodle, and the poneglyphs exist specifically because someone went, yeah, they're going to lie about this. Geography? Also fake. The Red Line, the Grand Line, that weird four oceans grid, the calm belt full of sea kings guarding nothing and everything at once. All of that looks less like natural formation and more like a paranoid parent putting child locks on the entire planet. Power systems and politics. Massive lie sandwich. Hockey is sold as the power of your spirit, but it's also the thing the world government never teaches the common people because, as far as crowd control goes, you don't want every fisherman on East Blue learning future sight. Devil fruits are treated as random sea gotcha, when they're probably some mix of wish-based tech, Mother Flame fallout, and Joyboy's bad decisions. The Marines call it justice, while literally working for a guy who sits on an empty throne under a spotlight. Subtle. But here's an interesting thing. The emotions are not lying to you. The friendship between the Straw Hats, Robin's "I want to live," Nami begging for help, Bon Clay sacrificing himself, Jinbe telling Luffy to stop shouldering everything alone. That stuff is real. The world might be a narrative mess of propaganda and retcons, But the core feelings are the one system that isn't fake. I want to emphasize that. The treasure might be a joke, but the tears never were. This is also where a lot of our fan assumptions quietly walk the plank. Our void century headcanons, probably incomplete by design, the will of D. We keep trying to lock it into one clean bloodline or prophecy, to which I say, have you met this series? Every time we think we've nailed down what D means, Oda tosses in someone like Law or Blackbeard or a random giant and goes, actually, it's weirder. Same with devil fruits and the One Piece itself. If you think you've solved it in a tweet thread, you have not. And to be fair, being lied to is the fun part. The story is putting us in the exact same position as the characters, trying to see past 800 years of curated nonsense. We're supposed to feel that gap between what the world says and what the poneglyphs, the D's and Laugh-Tale are whispering. So no, we don't know everything yet. But we do have a framework now. Every fact in One Piece is provisional until proven on screen, sung in a forbidden song, or carved into indestructible rock. Which means the next step is obvious. We need to look at what happens to a world this fake when someone finally drags the truth into the sun. How to build your own One Piece lore theory responsibly. So, if the world is this fake, how do we play in the sandbox without just writing fanfic with extra steps? We need a toolkit, not a tinfoil hat, because as far as One Piece theories go, the bar is on the floor and also somehow in a space. First rule, start with hard canon. Not vibes, not, this panel looks kind of circular, so the world is a donut. We mean direct quotes, poneglyph texts, Vegapunk's info dumps, and major character flashbacks. Ohara getting nuked for reading rocks? Canon. Roger laughing at Laugh-Tale and calling it a tale full of laughs? Canon? Vegapunk saying the Mother Flame can literally power an ancient weapon-level blast? Painfully canon. If a theory can't survive contact with those, it's not galaxy brain, it's just brain vapor. Here's an interesting thing. Hard canon in One Piece is often boring on the surface and insane once you cross-reference it. So, second rule, cross-connect everything. History, powers, geography. If your D theory doesn't touch the Void Century, Devil Fruits, and the Red Line, it's probably missing the actual point. Luffy's gears, Nika, and the sun god mythology? That's powers. The destruction of Lelouchia by some sky-based thing Imu pushes like a Windows update? That's geography and technology. The Great Kingdom, ancient weapons, and the D clan smiling at death? That's history. A good theory braids those three into one cursed rope, but I want to emphasize, do not overfit. Not every visual parallel is a secret code. Sometimes Oda draws a goofy face because he likes goofy faces. That random cover story seagull? Probably not Uranus in disguise. People love to say, every background extra is important, to which I say, mate, we barely have time to track the actual named revolutionaries. If your theory needs 10 unnamed silhouettes and a SBS joke to work, the system is a mess. Instead, use fear as your compass. The world government's panic is the most honest thing in this series. Ohara's books, Poseidon's bloodline, the existence of Laugh-Tale, even the idea of researching the Void Century is treated as worse than mass murder. What do they hide? The D lineage, the true shape of the world, and a treasure that might literally change sea levels or break the red line. If the Gorosei are sweating about it, you're probably near the truth. So here's your homework. Build theories that treat the world's shape, the D, and the One Piece's function as one unified system. Is the One Piece a mechanism that reshapes the planet so the seas reconnect? Is the D the key that lets a Joyboy reboot that system without wiping everyone out? And to be fair, we might all be wrong. But if you've got a theory that ties those three together without breaking canon, drop it in the comments, because next we're going to stress test the wildest possibilities this fake world can support. The final reframe: One Piece as a story about stories. So if the One Piece is some insane geo-reset button or reality patch, we've got to ask the even dumber, bigger question: what is it actually patching? Rocks and oceans, or the story of the world itself? Because as far as One Piece goes, the real battlefield isn't Marineford, it's the narrative. Who gets to decide what justice means, what pirate means, what D means? Victors, victims, or the clowns who laugh at both and refuse to read the script? Here's an interesting thing. The world government's greatest weapon is not Uranus, it's PR. The Void Century isn't just censored, it's replaced with a fanfic where the Great Kingdom are the bad guys, the celestial dragons are gods, and anyone who questions that gets a Buster Call speedrun. Ohara doesn't die because they had Pluton in the basement. They die because they were about to publish a spoiler. Mother Flame is just that logic turned into a beam. Believe our story, or we literally delete your island from the map. Poneglyphs exist as the world's rage quit to that system. Indestructible comment sections carved by the Kozuki clan going, "No, actually, here's what happened." And to be fair, that's why Emu treats archaeology like it's more dangerous than Blackbeard. A pirate can sink a fleet. A sentence can sink a regime. Now look at Joyboy, Roger, and Luffy as narrators. Joyboy writes an apology to a giant mermaid weapon and promises a party 1,000 years in the making. That's not just history. That's myth on purpose. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, reads the punchline of the world, and what does he do? He laughs, names the island Laugh Tale, and starts the great pirate era just by existing as a story other people want to chase. He doesn't press the button. He leaks the teaser trailer. Luffy is the next escalation of that same idea. He doesn't write essays. He writes rumors with his body. He punches a celestial dragon, rings the ox bell, burns the world government flag, and suddenly the whole world has to relitigate what a pirate even is. His Gear 5 is literally cartoon logic invading a serious world, like the story itself refusing to stay realistic and obedient. So, what if the One Piece is the ultimate narrative tool? Not a chest of gold, but a mechanism that lets you overwrite the world's script with the full, uncensored version, the true geography, the D, lineage, the ancient weapons, the deal behind devil fruits, all forced into the open at once. A global spoiler drop that no Buster Call can speedrun away. And here's where it gets uncomfortably meta. By arguing about power levels, doubting official Vivre cards, poking at contradictions, we're already doing what Robin and the scholars do. We're refusing to just accept the first story we're given. I want to emphasize that this is the quiet rebellion Oda rewards. The reader who goes, "Wait, but what if the government is lying to us too?" So, if One Piece is a story about stories, then the final question isn't what is the treasure, it's who gets to publish the last chapter. And if that sounds dramatic, just wait until we look at the one character who might already be editing the script in real time. Your turn. Rewrite what you thought you knew, which is our cue to hand the pen to you. We've gone from accepting the world government's cute little textbook version of history to treating it like what it actually is, a PR campaign duct-taped over a broken planet. We started with the Void Century and the Great Kingdom as this vague academic crime, and ended with the idea that the crime was trying to fix the world's shape, the seas, maybe even gravity itself. The winners didn't just erase a century. They patched over a global system failure and called it justice. Along the way, we treated the D lineage not as a fun middle initial, but as a recurring error message the world keeps trying to uninstall. Every major war, every ancient weapon, every accident, like Ohara or God Valley, starts orbiting that same letter. We looked at devil fruits as less random gotcha powers and more like receipts from an ancient tech or wish-granting system, possibly tied to the same civilization that built Pluton, Uranus, and whatever mother flame-adjacent nightmare Emu is hoarding. And to be fair, once you see Emu and the Gorosei as live moderators of reality itself, the celestial dragons stop being cartoon villains and start looking like obnoxious landlords squatting on a dead god's server. Here's an interesting thing. If the One Piece is a mechanism, not a chest of gold, then the whole story is basically a countdown. What does it do? Does it drop the red line, drain the seas, reboot gravity, turn the calm belt into a highway? Or is it something dumber and way scarier, like a giant publish button that releases the real history to every mind on the planet at once? People say, "That's too wild," to which I say, this is a series where a clown can split the continent. So now it's your turn. I want to emphasize, this isn't just fun headcanon time, this is fieldwork. Go back to Ohara and look at how terrified the elders are of a few books. Rewatch Skypiea and treat the Great Bell and the Sky Island itself as leftover hardware from the Great Kingdom. Hit Fishman Island again and ask why Joyboy's apology feels like a system rollback. Look at Dressrosa's toys and Wano's borders as test cases for rewriting bodies and walls on a global scale. What did we all miss because we were busy laughing at Luffy being an idiot? Drop your theories in the comments. What do you think the One Piece actually does to the planet? And which joke moment suddenly feels like Oda hiding a war crime in a gag? Because, as far as ongoing investigations go, this channel is basically the worst-kept secret lab in the Grand Line. We're not done. Next time, we're digging into even dumber, more obscure lore, the kind of side panels and SBS answers that probably should not be legally allowed to exist. So, subscribe, share this with the one friend who takes One Piece way too seriously, and keep your log pose pointed here. The lie is big, the world is broken, and we've only just started reading the margins.